Arc 8, Chapter 1, Change of Victory Conditions. The battle between the Imperial forces and the rebels that had begun on the battlefield of Lupagana, the imperial capital of the Wallachian Empire, had entered its final phase, scattering the seeds of chaos throughout the country. The same could have been true of the death of Vincent Wallachia, who had been killed by a bullet of light, in front of the throne within the Crystal Palace, the innermost part of the imperial capital. The 9 divine generals who were ordered to guard the city walls protecting the imperial capital had abandoned their duties, with a sudden arrival of unknown fighters in the battlefield, in addition to the mysterious group from the west that had opened a massive hole in the front line, which most certainly had contributed to the chaos scattered throughout the city. There was no doubt that these two were seeds of chaos. However, currently, the location of the seed that had grown the most in this situation of war had been Vincent, obey me. The situation is already no longer in the realm of armed conflict between the Imperial Army and the insurgents. The intervention of a third-party force has changed the conditions of victory. Standing upon a pile of debris, a man raised his voice on an impromptu stage. He was a handsome man, with sharp black eyes, tinged with a heated intellect, dried blood clinging to his black hair, and a voice that carried well even on a roaring battlefield. In a battlefield dominated by violence, no, in the Wallachian Empire dominated by violence, one might only wonder what could possibly attract people to the impotent figure of this man. No one ridiculed the man, even if they wished to. They just turned their attention and listened. The blood of the emperor that flowed through his veins, the way of being that the man himself had defined, would not allow listeners to turn their ears away from the voice that was raised on an unshapely pedestal. From Vincent Wallachia himself, who shouted from atop the rubble as the emperor. Everyone, .. Vincent's loud declaration had been heard by a distinguished lineup of people. Lined up were Goes Ralphon and Olbart Dunkelken, both members of the 9 divine generals, as well as Bastetz von Dalphon, the imperial prime minister, and even Ubilk the Stargazer, who had been allowed entry into the imperial palace in a special role. Considering which side each had been on during the conflict just before, the attendees were such that one could easily say having them be face to face at such a distance, standing unguarded, was a rather fatal thing. However, Vincent, Moguro Hagane is suppressing him, but the one they are facing in the sky above is Borleroy Temeglif, who is supposed to be dead. Somehow, he has risen with his own beloved dragon. Bastetz, I have a message for you on this matter. I encountered Her Excellency Lamia Godwin in the audience chamber. I believe it is the same person as she was back then. Goes, why you? That report should be raised by me. Your Excellency. It was not only Lamia who was present, but also other members of the royal family who perished in the imperial selection ceremony. To Vincent's words, Bastetz and Goes responded. Goes, who had remained unchangeably loyal to Vincent, despite his disappearance, was still vexed by Bastetz's switch. Nevertheless, since Bastetz's original concern was the prosperity of the Wallachian Empire, the old man's attitude could be described as natural when it came to a situation where the very existence of the empire was at stake. Once these ramblings had been dismissed as trivial, Vincent's concerns were narrowed. Vincent, Ubilk, you knew about the cause of the great disaster beforehand. If that is the case, do Borleroy Temeglif, Lamia, and the other imperial family members reviving constitute the great disaster? Ubilk, regarding that matter, I can say yes and no to that, Your Excellency. The whispers told me that Vincent Wallachia's death would be the trigger for the great disaster, and I plotted all kinds of schemes to prevent the downfall of the empire. Vincent, you were not aware of the details. Ubilk nodded with a carefree look on his face and answered, yes Tilda, that's right. The answer was somewhat expected, but the certainty gained was beneficial to Vincent. Ubilk and his fellow stargazers were in opposition to the great disaster, which was evident in the fact that they had saved Vincent from a fall. Vincent, if that is the case, in the current situation, your presence is currently outside of our consideration. Maneuver only not to die. Goes, Your Excellency. Please leave this situation to me, and put your own safety first. I, Goes Ralphon, will do everything in my power to redeem myself for my absence. Vincent, silence. Goes, dash. Glancing at a heated Goes, Vincent, with a single word, crushed his momentum. Goes wanted a chance to prove his loyalty to the Emperor and redeem himself for being late at a crucial time, but his work had been sufficient when he had let Vincent escape from Chaisha's rebellion in the first place. If it had not been for Goes's hard fight, Vincent would have been captured by Chaisha, and it was highly possible that even this situation could not have been created in the imperial capital. Yes, this situation had been created. Vincent, dash dash. Vincent placed a hand on his chin and drew a mental map of the imperial capital, piecing together the situation. Although the loss of blood and the exhaustion of his body were affecting his ability to think, fortunately, the pain in his collarbone from being struck by Chaisha in the throne room was awakening his consciousness. His determination was also strong. He did not think that even this pain was part of Chaisha's plan, but... Cecilus, sorry to interrupt while everyone's chattering, but I have a role to enchant the world in my own way. Is it okay if I excuse myself? Goes, what? General Cecilus. What are you talking about? Cecilus, well, I occasionally hear about this Mr. General person, but I'm not really interested, so it doesn't really stick in my mind. Maybe you've mistaken me for someone else. It would be quite a pity for this Mr. General person to get compared to me in that case. In this situation, it was not just Vincent's mind that was whirring and spinning around. Moreover, within a radius of several tens of meters, which was just one step for the huge body of Moguro, the battle against the duo of the Cloud Dragon Mizoya and Borleroy continued. The water from the shattered reservoir, which could be seen being broken from a distance, flowed out, and it was only a matter of time before waves surged into the entire imperial capital. In addition, Cecilus, who had been making a fuss, had become tiny. Although Goes, Bastetz, and even Olbart showed a waiting attitude for Vincent's decision, only this young thunderbolt did not fit into his plan. Not only his appearance, but also the contents of his mind seemed to be biased towards immaturity, so Cecilus did not have a trusting look in his eyes towards Vincent's declaration. Cecilus, that was quite a splendid speech earlier. I'm sure it's a fact that you're the Wallachian emperor, but unfortunately, I don't bow down to others just because they're an emperor. If you want to change the path I take, you'll have to prepare a Hanamichi for me. 1. Vincent, dash. Just like Natsuki Subaru did, is that so? Cecilus, dash. Unfortunately, I don't know who that is. The name sounds similar to someone I know, but I can't quite recall. I feel like I talked about this earlier with a beautiful woman. Cecilus answered while twisting his neck and fidgeting his short legs. He was not sure who the beautiful woman Cecilus was worried about was, but when the young Cecilus entered the battle for the imperial capital, Vincent had been convinced. Convinced that Natsuki Subaru was the one who led the unexpected group that ravaged the battlefield from the west, and that he was also the one who had brought Cecilus with him. And then, Vincent, not just in the current situation, but it is nothing new that you do not follow my orders. Feel free to run around as you like. Cecilus, oh, you are very understanding. However, I have no intention of obediently following someone's orders regardless of what I'm told anyways. So, I'll take my leave here if you don't mind. Vincent, Cecilus. Cecilus waved his hand at Vincent, who had decided to let him do as he pleased, and was about to dart away. When his name was called from behind, the young lightning turned around with a yes. Vincent's gaze met Cecilus's eyes, which still carried the same difficulty in handling as when they had first met. Vincent, as per our former agreement, I shall prepare the stage for your grand moment. Cecilus, aha. Cecilus left with a small laugh after Vincent's short declaration. The speed of lightning-fast movements that did not even leave a trace, and that was still in his unfinished state, that was why the title of Wallachnia's strongest belonged to that man and was unshakable. In any case, Bastetz, Your Excellency, is everything all right? As for General Cecilus. Vincent, I do not have time to waste on trivial matters just like your and you bilks treatment. More importantly, the handling of the disappeared Cecilus was less urgent than addressing the current problem at hand. Vincent faced Bestetz's narrow eyes and spoke in a voice that could be heard by Goes, Olbart, and the others behind him. What he said was, "Vincent, we will abandon the imperial capital. We will retreat while maintaining as much of our military strength as possible." Riding atop a red gale-wind horse, the group rode through the imperial capital in a whirlwind of confusion and chaos. The flag-bearers were the familiar faces of Natsuki Subaru, flanked by the cavalryman Idra Misanga and the powerful young girl Tanza, with whom the Pleiades battalion's breakthrough ability remained strong. Subaru, plus, now we add the two leading stars there, Beatrice and Louis, and we're the ones with the momentum. In front, Idra was holding the reins, and at his back, held in Subaru's short arms as if being sandwiched, was Beatrice, then Louis, who was nestled on Subaru's back. Unexpectedly, the four children were led by the adult Idra Butt. Beatrice, Minya. Louis, wow. Tanza, I beg your pardon. Beatrice's hand held up as she fired purple arrows, Louis's unrestricted attacks as she teleported through space, and Tanza's fists as she effortlessly reaped through the ones blocking their path. After jumping over the destroyed city walls into the imperial capital, Subaru and company were aiming for the Crystal Palace, which could be seen in the distance, a gleaming castle where the fake emperor presided. The fake emperor that was in that castle, the one who impersonated Vincent Wallachia. If they could be defeated, it would put an end to this great civil war in the Wallachian Empire, in which Subaru was inevitably embroiled. So believing this, he plunged in, ready to go wild and wreak havoc. Idra, Schwartz. These guys are springing up no matter where we go through. What is this? Idra's voice, though not quite a scream, was throaty with a deep-seated fear. Perhaps his consternation was felt through the reins in his hands as the gait of the gale-wind horse began to falter, but it would be unreasonable to expect him to just endure it or forget about it. Anyhow. Subaru, what's really going on with these pasty-faced guys? They knew that once they rode into the imperial capital, they would naturally be met with determined resistance from the imperial soldiers. However, it was only during the initial stages that Subaru and company actually encountered imperial soldiers in the imperial capital. From then on, Subaru and the others were confronted by strange-looking beings, all of them with pale faces. Those with pale faces and golden eyes, with glass-like cracks all over their bodies, obstructed Subaru and the others with a cold, heartless demeanor. No, they were not standing in the way, only Subaru and company. Tanza, Schwartz Summer, those ones, they are also attacking the imperial soldiers. Tanza kicked a group of pale faces and slammed them against a wall, throwing out a report as such. As she said, what was unfolding at the edge of her vision was the presence of the enemy who was not attacking Subaru and company, but rather the imperial soldiers who were guarding the city. Of course, these enemies did not care about Subaru's feelings, unlike the Pleiades battalion. They were relentless in their attempts to take the lives of imperial soldiers using the weapons they wielded. That was why? Subaru, Tanza. If you please. Tanza, I understand. Hearing Subaru's unreasonable request, Tanza accelerated as she kicked the ground. She charged like a speeding ball into the ranks of the enemy, the imperial soldiers, and caught up with those who were about to take their lives, cleaving them in the back with her thick-soled shoes. HK. A short cry of pain could be heard, and the kicked enemy crashed into the buildings on both sides. Tanza glanced at the destroyed buildings, the imperial guardsmen whose lives had been spared beyond the thick plume of smoke, and then said, "Go ahead," as she let them off. Fortunately, the soldiers who were saved chose to leave the area instead of attempting to target Tanza's back. Subaru, that is helpful. But what about these guys? Tanza's efforts were averting unwanted deaths, however, Subaru suffered the brunt of her blow and was left gasping at the devastation caused by the enemy that crashed into the buildings and shattered them. The reason why the enemy did not get up was partly that Tanza's kicks were so powerful, but more importantly, because they were in no condition to get back up. The body of the enemy was shattered and in pieces. However, their body was not a grotesque corpse, but rather had been shattered as if they had dropped a china cup on the floor. There was no blood, either. As if there was no blood in their bodies. Subaru, how do they work? Is it like a puppet or maybe a robot? Beatrice, it can't be, the sacrament of the immortal king, in fact. Subaru, do you have an idea, Beatrice? Subaru did not miss the words spun by Beatrice's cute cherry-like lips, who was resting her body on Subaru's chest, completely trusting him. Beatrice lowered her head in response to Subaru's reaction. Beatrice, a kind of magic that, upon death, returns the soul to the body from which it has left. A forbidden technique, I suppose. It was originally researched by Mother, but it was supposedly left incomplete. Subaru, a forbidden technique for raising the dead, so like the type of magic of a necromancer, then? There's a part of my head that's still a little fuzzy, but man, your mother is a good-for-nothing. Beatrice, this is not the first time that Subaru has spoken ill of Mother, in fact, but Betty will get upset if you keep saying it, so be careful, I suppose. At Beatrice's suggestion, with her eyebrows raised, Subaru stuck out his tongue and closed one eye in reflection. However, the opinion of the cute Beatrice was not to be dismissed. What if necromancy, with a name like the sacrament of the immortal king, was what was creating these enemies? Subaru, you mean there's someone like a necromancer in the 9 divine generals of the empire? 2. Beatrice, if that's the case, then Abel is out of line for not having talked about such things beforehand, in fact. Plus, it would mean that we wouldn't be able to distinguish between friend and foe, I suppose. Subaru, I guess that's also possible in an empire with buggy ethics, but... Wait. You know who Abel is? Beatrice, Betty knows, in fact. Hearing this unexpected name from Beatrice's mouth caused Subaru's eyes to widen. At Subaru's surprise, Beatrice affirmed it with a bitter look on her face. Beatrice's contact with Abel, and that it was not just another person with the same name, was clearly conveyed in her bitter face. Because Abel was essentially incompatible with everyone, the obvious explanation would be that he was incompatible with Beatrice as well. Subaru's stomach churned just thinking about what kind of irreverent attitude Abel had subjected Beatrice to. But Subaru, of course, that guy is here. It was inconceivable that Abel would not be in the middle of the siege in this great battle. But, since he did not know the specifics of the composition of the rebel forces, he felt a different emotion when told clearly that this was the case. If Abel was here, then Subaru's antics would need to be given some extra thought. Subaru, then, should I leave the zombie fighting to them over there rather than me? Or would it be better if it was me with the cute and zombie-savvy Beatrice running in to deal with the... Ouch, ouch, ouch. What? Beatrice, I suppose. Subaru's face was a bit annoying, in fact. Subaru, why? This look in my eyes between charming and cheeky is from birth, you know? Beatrice, it was annoying how strangely relieved you looked when you heard Abel's name, I suppose. Subaru's mouth curved into a pout as Beatrice pinched his thigh along with an irrational accusation. Although it was hard to say by exactly how much, Beatrice's judgment of Subaru might have become stricter in the period of time that they had been separated. Certainly, he recognized Abel's excellence in terms of ability. But, under the circumstances of this large-scale conflict, he was not taking any comfort in hearing Abel's name. By any measure, meeting Beatrice was a more joyous occasion than meeting Abel. Subaru, you're my number one, Beatrice, don't misunderstand. Beatrice, then prove it going forward, in fact. Subaru, oh, absolutely. In response to Beatrice's benevolent judgment, Subaru tapped Idra on the shoulder and made the Galewind horse stop at once. There were no signs of enemies or civilians in the surrounding area, but he wanted to decide on a course of action for the future. Tanza, Schwartz Summer, if you are done flirting, what would you propose we do? Subaru, you're acting so thorny. I wasn't flirting. But Beatrice. Does that zombie magic stop when the user is defeated? Stung in the side by Tanza's blank expression, Subaru sought Beatrice's informed opinion. Beatrice, when asked, fiddled with her vertically rolled hair with her fingers, and the two of them, with the same expression on their faces. Beatrice, the types of magic that interfere with the bodies of others are predominantly yin magic and yang magic, I suppose. With either of these attributes, generally speaking, when the caster dies, the effects of the magic are cut off, in fact. So likewise, it would be nice to think that this is the case, I suppose. Tanza, that phrasing has some wishful thinking mingled within. Is it not certain? Beatrice, even Betty has never seen the sacrament of the immortal king realized, in fact. One cannot be so childishly irresponsible as to make a haphazard judgment on the basis of speculation, I suppose. Subaru, calm down, calm down. So, you don't have any idea of the area of effect or where the magic is being used from? Beatrice, it's regrettable, but it's dependent on the user, in fact. Beatrice looked at Tanza in frustration as she replied, as if thinking that Tanza might be dismissive of her again. However, Tanza did not criticize Beatrice for admitting her inadequacy. In that regard, Tanza did not demean even those with whom she did not have the best chemistry. Subaru, there's no time for squabbling. Besides, Beatrice, what you said helps. Thanks. Beatrice, it was not a very praiseworthy response, I suppose. Beatrice's cheeks puffed out as he patted her head while thanking her. It was tempting to poke her swollen cheeks with his fingers, but he also felt he was put in a difficult position. Given the circumstances, this zombie attack was clearly an unusual situation. Since the Imperial soldiers were being attacked, it was certainly possible that there was a necromancer in the rebel army and that the unscrupulous and cold-hearted Abel might have resorted to inhumane tactics. However, something was off about the implementation and how the zombies had appeared out of nowhere. These zombies clearly gave off the impression that they did not invade the city from the outside, but rather that they had been created from within the city and were rampaging around. If this was Abel's strategy, the best course of action would have been to start a war of attrition from the beginning. It might have even been plausible that there were some military techniques being used that Subaru was unaware of. Subaru, as expected, if they start using zombies, I'll have to think about how to deal with them. Moreover, although it was ultimately a vague impression, he felt that while Abel would not use the actual dead for military purposes despite resorting to death for political purposes, he suspected that Abel's view of life and death, or the general Volakian one for that matter, would not allow for that. Therefore, Subaru, the existence of this zombie meister should be considered irregular. If the war doesn't end when we beat up the fake emperor in the castle, then... Idra, what now, Schwartz? We'll follow your lead, Subaru, Idra. Subaru put his hand to his chin as Idra turned only his head to him to utter these words of trust. That was not a sign of him tossing the responsibility to Subaru, but rather a reaffirmation of his willingness to risk his life together with Subaru in a situation that might lead them to death once again. Subaru achieved this position by his own will. He absolutely had to fulfill that responsibility. And thanks to Idra and the members of the Pleiades battalion, Subaru could reach out his hand even further than before. Subaru, I'm not entirely sure what to do in this situation, but after all... Ow 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 ow. Ow ow. Beatrice and Tanza, Subaru. Schwartz Summer. Subaru nodded at the realization of his responsibility, but screamed in pain from Beatrice pinching his thigh and from another pain, to which Beatrice and Tanza widened their eyes at him. This time Subaru felt pain because his hair was being pulled. And the one responsible was not Beatrice or Tanza, much less Idra, but... Subaru, what the hell, Louis? Don't pull my hair. It's a vital defense strategy to take care of it from a young age so that I won't suffer from baldness when I get older. Louis, you ow. You. Oh. You. Subaru, what? Louis desperately pleaded something to Subaru, who was protecting his pulled scalp. She patted Subaru on the back, then pointed to the north side of the imperial capital, the direction where the Crystal Palace was located, but slightly off the beaten path, and continuously urged him. Head there, he knew that was what she was saying. Subaru, is there something over there? Louis, oh. Subaru's question was answered by Louis in a high-pitched voice. It also needs to be stated that Louis seemed to be quite emotionally stable now that she managed to meet up with Subaru. Subaru himself was also genuinely relieved at her safety, despite their complicated relationship. On top of that, if there was something that Louis was calling for so desperately, then that would be Subaru, Beatrice, let me ask you one thing. Is everyone still together? Beatrice, everyone, is not, in fact. In response to Subaru's quiet question, Beatrice avoided making a clear statement. However, it was clear that Beatrice was not being evasive for the sake of putting on airs, but rather to spare Subaru from the shock. Understanding this, Subaru also realized why she had been ambiguous. So, Subaru, Tanza, Idra. Also, Beatrice and Louis, change of plans. Concluding on what needed to be done, Subaru called to the members around him from the Galewind Horse. Most likely, the battle centered around the imperial capital would not calm down, but rather intensify further. With the zombies and their Meister being unknown entities, preparations were in order. Of course, he could put together such a theory, but Subaru, first, we're going to where Louis is pointing at. Let me pick up something important there. Beatrice, if it's Louis then. She will be there, I suppose. Subaru's decision gave Beatrice a sense of the destination that Louis was indicating. Nodding at Beatrice's words, Subaru turned to Tanza and Idra, who were also looking at him, and continued. That was. Subaru, pick up Rem and flee the imperial capital with as many people as you can. We're racing against the clock. Thus, he mysteriously made a decision in the same direction as the man who was not present at this moment. Arc 8, Chapter 2, Grudges. Beatrice was at a loss as to how to handle the little girl known as Louis. When the magic crystal cannon fired from the Crystal Palace, their relationship allowed them to cooperate in sending it to another space. Without Louis's mysterious teleportation ability, it would not have been possible to reach that place. Had they not arrived, many deaths would have occurred on the battlefield, starting with Seekers. This single act alone could not have dispelled the responsibility of Louis being the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony. And yet, Louis, A.U. Beatrice, Betty can trust that you have no animosity towards Subaru and the others, I suppose. Sitting awkwardly on the shaking saddle, although only the size of children, 3 people aside from the primary rider rode the running red Galewind horse. On the back of the Galewind horse, Beatrice and Louis sat with Subaru between them. Unlike Beatrice, who was held in Subaru's arms, Louis dexterously stood up on the horse behind him, tapping Subaru's shoulder and pointing in one direction. From Beatrice's point of view, the situation in the imperial city of Lupagana was a crucible of chaos. Beginning with the clash between the regular army and the rebels, uncommanded flying dragons, and flying dragons that fought each other for the sky, the white world and the red world transgressed the normal one, a giant and a dragon rampaged, and finally, the dead rose one after another, to ravage the city from the inside out. Being inclined to isolate herself, not giving support to anyone, there were few occasions in which Beatrice had directly intervened, but this world's insane and inconsistent way of being reminded her of the chaotic times of 400 years ago. Beatrice, witches. Thinking back to those bygone days, Beatrice naturally uttered that word. If there could have been one thing that symbolized that era of 400 years ago, it was unmistakably the witches. Echidna, Beatrice's creator, and the one whom she adored as her mother, was also one of those who were labeled as witches. Other than that, that era in which there were several witches bearing the deadly sins, that era when everyone was struggling to survive, was a dark period that was like a child's nightmare come true. The current situation in the imperial capital was a return of the same thing. She wondered what could have triggered it, and her heart skipped a beat. while Beatrice held those frustrations in her heart. Subaru, hang in there, Rem. Immediately behind her, she heard Subaru's panting, yet determined, voice. Louis, voice sounding like a growl, and Subaru, hurrying the galloping horse in the direction she pointed, had no doubt that there was the waiting girl he was searching for. As Beatrice thought of the results of the time that Subaru had spent with Louis, separated from her, her chest became a hazy mess, but she understood that there was trust between them. Beatrice, too, had no doubt that Rem was there, in the direction to which Louis was pointing. Looking back, Louis had spent a large amount of mana to extinguish the magic crystal cannon and went straight to Subaru to try to save the disappearing Beatrice. She had the power to locate those she was looking for. Whether that could be anyone, or only someone she knew, was unclear. Subaru, a huge mansion. Idra, what do we do, Schwartz? The walls are high. Do we go around to the front? Subaru, no, that would be a waste of time. Tanza. The exchange took place as they crossed a number of streets ahead of them and approached their intended building. It was a mansion that took up an imposingly large plot of land in the northern part of the imperial capital, and its surroundings indicated that it was the residence of a person of high rank. Naturally, the walls surrounding the mansion were high to ensure adequate security. But, Tanza, I do not want to give you the wrong impression. Saying that, the dear girl, her voice as emotionless as her face, kicked the ground with the slightest hint of disapproval in her features and mutterings. Tanza, the young girl plunging straight into the wall in front of her, continued. Tanza, I am not Schwartz Summer's tool for breaking down walls. Right after her declaration, Tanza's thick-soled shoes struck the mansion's wall, which was likely imbued with the divine protection of earth attributes. This impact caused the wall, which should have enhanced the mansion's defenses, to cave in, be penetrated, and ultimately collapse. Accompanied by a booming sound and a gust of wind, the small silhouette of a girl emerged from beyond the wall. As if diving headfirst into the billowing smoke, the gale-wind horse carrying Beatrice and the others leapt onto the property. And then... Louis, wow. Beatrice, Subaru, over there, in fact. Within the spacious mansion grounds, multiple buildings separated from the main house were lined up, causing them to, momentarily, almost lose their sense of direction. However, looking around just like Subaru, Beatrice opened her round eyes and searched for their target, before noticing a gathering of people. At that same instant, Louis also looked in the same direction as Beatrice and shouted out, reinforcing her conviction. Ahead of them, at the entrance of a separate building, there were several figures. In front of the firmly shut door, all that could be seen was a back sporting the ragged equipment of an imperial soldier, and facing it were two figures, one of which Beatrice did not recognize. The other was a girl whom Beatrice recognized as well. Subaru, L. Beatrice, Minya. A dull sword was raised, targeting the girl and her companion. As soon as they noticed it, Beatrice and Subaru, holding hands, raised their opposite hands and chanted magic. The ensuing deep purple arrow captured the back of the pale-faced men, transforming them into crystals. Enemies, Gar. A bitter cry leaked out, but no further action by the men was allowed. Accompanied by a high-pitched sound, similar to ice cracking, the men's figures shattered and crumbled away. The gale-wind horse reached the girl, who, narrowly escaping death, widened her eyes in surprise as Beatrice and Subaru landed on the ground together, her hand pulled by his, and there. Subaru, kept you waiting, Rem. The real star has stepped on the stage. With one eye closed and teeth gleaming, Subaru made a pompous declaration. Despite his childish appearance, Beatrice looked at her partner from within his arms, proud of his unchanging bravery and scrambling to help someone else. The eyes of the girl whose life was saved widened as she met the gazes of Beatrice and Subaru. As it were, the excitement and emotion quivered within her throat. Rem, who are you? She asked, in a dubious voice, with an atmosphere that was not very friendly. Subaru, no, it's me. I'm a bit smaller, I'm telling you, it's me. You can tell, right? Rem, I'm grateful for the help, but you ring no bells at all. Subaru, no way. Subaru waved his arms and sorrowed at that unexpected cold response from Rem. He felt dejected by this reaction, especially since he thought that, after going through a hopeless experience, then having been saved from a life-threatening predicament, a deeply emotional meeting was surely awaiting him. Of course, since Subaru, being Subaru, went and got himself shrunk while Rem remained unaware, he thought that asking her to be openly happy would also be unreasonable. Subaru, in that sense, setting aside Louis, who already knew me in this state, it's quite something that Beatrice would just accept it right away. Beatrice, it's not really that Betty thought nothing of it, I suppose. It's merely that whether you have shrunk or not, it will not change that you're Betty's partner, in fact. More importantly. Subaru, more importantly. Lowered to the ground from the arms in which she had been held, Beatrice looked at Subaru and Rem, comparing them. Then, narrowing her peculiarly patterned eyes. Beatrice, that attitude is completely different from what Betty had heard from Subaru, I suppose. That girl. Rem was supposed to have been gentle towards Subaru, in fact. Was that a lie, I suppose? Subaru, no, that wasn't a lie. It's just that she's forgotten a lot right now. Beatrice, forgotten. Derived from Rem's cold treatment, Beatrice was made unnecessarily suspicious. Likely, it was the doubt about whether Subaru had led everyone who did not remember Rem in her sleeping beauty state to believe a story that differed from reality. It was an unthinkable misunderstanding. In the first place, something like lying about Rem's personality as she slept was beyond blasphemous, and it too also made Subaru miserable. In response to Subaru's explanation, Beatrice silently turned back to Rem. Beatrice, you don't remember Betty, in fact. Rem, no, I believe this is our first meeting. Beatrice, I see, I suppose. I understand now, in fact. Rem, it seems that's persuaded you, but in the end, who are you guys? I appreciate the help, but... Beatrice's face showed that from Rem's reply, she accepted that Subaru had not just said whatever he wanted. On the other hand, Rem's doubts remained undispelled. Even if Subaru and Beatrice were unilaterally convinced, Rem's questions would only continue to pile up. Although his own internal sense of discomfort had relatively decreased, sure enough, Rem's attitude clearly conveyed that the large Subaru and the small Subaru were completely different. Subaru, be that as it may, I'm me. Rem, in any case, let's tar. ? Oh my? I was wondering who helped us, but it's husband Kun. It's husband Kun, right. Thanks for rushing in. Subaru, look, Flop-san understands. Eh? Flop-san? Saying that as Subaru was trying to somehow unravel Rem's incomprehension, he was taken aback at the sight of Flop, the blonde-haired young man that suddenly appeared from behind her. Having come to help Rem, he had not even considered that Flop would be with her. Subaru, why are you here? Were you kidnapped along with Rem? Flop, my oh my, it's quite daring to come to wife San's aid without knowing anything, isn't it? But, on the whole, that understanding is not mistaken. More specifically, it would be correct to say that since I suffered a fatal wound, wife San accompanied me to give me treatment. Subaru, a fatal wound. You're right. That's a terrible injury. Flop was as cheerful as ever, but, ignoring that ridiculously bright personality, the skin visible through the gaps in his clothes was wrapped in bandages, and his complexion seemed somewhat pale. Judging with his experience from the Gladiator Island, Flop was seriously wounded to the level where standing would have been greatly difficult. It seemed like saying that he had received a fatal wound had not been an exaggeration. Subaru, but, then Rem also. Geez, you're too gutsy. Rem, please wait. You're trying to move the conversation along smoothly, but... Flop-san, by calling this boy that. Flop, perhaps this kind of thing is all the more easier for a third party to notice? Like wife San is thinking, it's husband Kun. With just a bit more baby face. Rem, .. At Flop's words, Rem stared down towards Subaru once again. Faced with the doubt emerging within her pale blue eyes, Subaru adjusted the angle of his face to give her a better view, and flashed his teeth. The hue of doubt turned to dismay, which then quickly turned to surprise. Rem, I thought you were a very strange person, but not only can you dress up as a woman, but you can even turn into a child. Subaru, that's wrong. This situation is out of my control. Isn't that right, Beatrice? Beatrice, Subaru, were you cross-dressing again in a place unknown to Betty and the others, I suppose? Subaru, don't get caught up on that right now. Both Rem and Beatrice looked at Subaru with doubt, overwhelming him. Flop, standing by the exchange, while holding up a finger to his own well-groomed face. Flop, well, it wasn't only husband Kun who dressed up as a woman, myself and village chief Kun also did it after all. We really looked like girls all together, and our figures were lovely too. Subaru, that's because I put all my points into my charisma stat at that time. Anyways, I'm glad we were able to meet up. Patting his chest in relief, Subaru smiled at both Rem and Flop. Flop nodded frankly at the smile, and Rem, after contemplating every last possibility. Rem, you went through all this trouble to search for me? Subaru, well, of course. No, I didn't know you had been kidnapped until I was en route, but the moment I found out, my selfish feelings surged up. The only thing that made me certain you were here was Louis, you. And just then, while he answered Rem's question, the reason for his certainty burst in. Wedging herself in between Subaru and Rem, it was Louis who had jumped toward the latter. Louis's golden hair fluttered as she embraced Rem, and even though she was surprised and gave a wow, Rem accepted the young girl's hug. With that face so close to her, relief emerged in Rem's eyes. Rem, Louis-chan, I see you're safe. I was worried that you might have been mistreated by him, since you went off on your own following that man. Louis, ow. Subaru, no matter how you look at it, would I really treat her so poorly that you would be worried? Did I do that? I did, didn't I? I probably did do that. I regret that now, though. Stroking Louis's head as she hugged her, Rem made such a comment which Subaru pouted his lips. In fact, if Rem and Louis separated at the time when Subaru and the others had set out to Chaos Flame, then that was the point in time at which Subaru and Louis's relationship had been the worst. It was not limited to the worry that along the way, Subaru may have taken the opportunity to abandon Louis in the fields. It could be said that Rem's worries were never-ending, but then again. Subaru, right now, I'm not thinking about doing anything to Louis. We've made peace. Rem, is that true? Louis-chan? Louis, you. With a broad smile on her face, Louis nodded her head, and the question mark above Rem's head was finally dispelled by her response. Since his body had shrunk, the circumstances which had probably been his biggest predicament were proceeding peacefully, so Subaru breathed a sigh of relief. Then, while gripping onto Subaru's hand, Beatrice, even though Betty intended on accepting it, it's still a scene that gives a very bad feeling, in fact. Such a thing like that girl and Rem being so friendly towards each other, it's a strange feeling, I suppose. Even though Beatrice muttered this, Subaru made a wry smile within his heart. However, considering that when he was first sent off of the Volakian Empire, he was viewed with hostility by the newly awakened Rem, and was together in a situation with Louis, whose aims were completely unknown to him, Subaru was also in complete agreement with Beatrice. After all, through some causality, a Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, the cause of Rem turning into the Sleeping Beauty, was now spending time with her in the same place in such a friendly manner. Subaru, I still haven't found the proper answer for that yet, but Rem's memory had still yet to return. Louis's origin, too, still remained unknown. However, they were able to stay alive and reunite with Rem in this way, and Louis had also demonstrated as much of a friendly attitude towards them as she could. Thus, they should be able to find a solution. Therefore, Tanza, Schwartz Summer, I do not think we have much time to be so relaxed. Witnessing the atmosphere of that reunion, the young girl interrupted with good timing and a good reason. Upon hearing the intervention of Tanza, the little girl in a kimono, who had read the atmosphere, Subaru turned to her and said, "Yep." Then, keeping up a vigilant watch out on the surroundings from horseback, Idra also entered his field of view, and "Idra, we found the person you're looking for. By the way, there isn't anyone else who has been taken, right?" "Beatrice, as far as Betty has heard, there shouldn't be anyone else, in fact. Rem, I also haven't noticed anyone else. Has Flop-san?" "Flop, I don't know of any other acquaintances who were brought in, either. Unless, carelessly, Medium has been kidnapped or something." "How's she, husband Kun?" "Subaru, she hadn't been kidnapped at the time we were separated, she'd shrunk, though." "Flop, huh? What's that? What did you say?" To Flop, who was concerned about his sister's safety, Subaru withheld the fact that Medium had also shrunk. Other than a shrunken appearance, she was in perfect health. Surely Medium would have left Chaos Flame safely and joined the group at Garrel. There was not time to reconcile the details of the situation and to wrangle over this and that there. In order to guarantee such a lively and cheerful time, they needed to move. "Subaru, so, including Rem and Flop-san, I want to escape with as many people as possible, but is there anyone else in this estate?" "Rem, there is a woman named Katya-san whom I met here. Then, there's this detached building." "Subaru, here?" With a nod, Rem's gaze turned to the tightly closed door beside her. He had to defeat the enemy quickly, so he did not check it properly, but it seemed that Rem and Flop were trying to open this building. "Flop, it said that inside are black-haired crown princes from various places." "Idra, black-haired crown princes? Schwartz's fakes?" Flop answered Subaru's inner questions, and Idra frowned upon its content. The perception Idra expressed, that they were fake Schwartzes, was generally shared by everyone in the Pleiades battalion, and it was one of the big lies Subaru was telling them. The black-haired crown prince, who was talked about across the empire, was the illegitimate son of Emperor Vincent Wallachia, and all of those who had taken the name for themselves in various regions were nothing but fakes. The real black-haired crown prince was none other than Natsuki Schwartz. "Idra, the ones who were used as justification here and there to start a rebellion? To be blunt, I don't like this careless approach to things." "Beatrice, Betty agrees with Beardy, I suppose. The originator doesn't like it either, in fact." "Idra, be Beardy." Idra clearly expressed his displeasure at the imposter crown princes who seemed to be held captive inside the detached building, to which Beatrice nodded in agreement. To be blunt, Idra's words were painful for Subaru to hear as well. Beatrice's added comment seemed to support Subaru's guess as to whose scheme this was. Frankly, it was difficult to distinguish whether some of the fake crown princes were good guys or if some of them were bad guys. "Tanza, Schwartz Summer, what would you like to do?" Subaru, "Nah, isn't there really nothing to discuss? If they're left here, sooner or later the zombies are definitely going to kill them, so we don't have a choice but to help." Tanza, --. With a hushed voice, Subaru replied to Tanza, who was asking for his decision. Tanza's eyes widened at the answer in regards to the black-haired crown princes. She was the only one who had been told ever since Gladiator Island that Subaru's claim to be the successor to the Emperor was a lie spread for the purpose of creating a disturbance. A huge reason why the comrades of the Pleiades battalion trusted Subaru and were willing to participate in this battle for the imperial capital was because they believed that Subaru was the black-haired crown prince. If the captive false crown princes were released, the chances of that lie being exposed would increase. Subaru, but, that is that and this is this. Even though he was aware of Tanza's concerns, Subaru would not sacrifice human lives to protect a lie. Of course, one would hope that this act of compassion would be returned, and that the fake crown princes would be quietly appreciative of the efforts of Subaru and his friends. "Beatrice, As expected of Betty's Subaru, I suppose. Beatrice looked at Tanza proudly while tightly holding Subaru's hand. For a moment, there was a tingle flowing between them again, but Subaru put it aside. Taking that into account, they faced the detached building's door. Subaru, does Rem or Flop-san have the keys to the entrance? Rem, no, I didn't know where the key was, so I thought I would pry it open by force. Flop, you can trust in wife-san's strength. As you already know, my arms are as meager as they look. With Louis attached to Rem at the hip, Flop showed off his feeble biceps. Subaru scratched his cheek at the two's replies, and pathetically turning to face Tanza. Subaru, would you be the master key once again? Tanza, I am not sure what a master key is, but I understand what you are trying to say. Schwartz-Summer, I would like to reiterate this to you. Subaru, Tanza isn't a tool for breaking open walls, right? Forgive me. Towards Subaru, who meekly bowed his head, Tanza released a deep, deep sigh. However, it was not just a sigh. With deep compassion Tanza softly spoke, please step aside, to request that Subaru and Rem move away from the front of the door, and she gripped the large padlock hanging from it with both of her hands. Then, with a sudden and strong jerk of Tanza's slender hands, the lock twisted off. It was quite the shocking sight, but Subaru and Idra had grown used to seeing it. At Tanza's unbelievable display of superhuman strength, Rem and Flop stared in wonder, and as Subaru saw those reactions to his side, he took a light breath and slowly opened the door to the solitary building. And then, Subaru, I think that everyone has their own respective circumstances, but, for the time being, why don't we put away our various grudges, and work together to get out of this place? Like that, being careful not to alarm the cautious inhabitants, Subaru entered the solitary building, inside of which were lines of narrow jail cells, containing the fake crown princes which Subaru had greeted. Fake crown princes, .. At Subaru's call, the faces of 14 or 15 young boys turned towards him. As they had been called the black-haired crown princes, and counting backwards from the current age of the Emperor Vincent equals Abel, it was to be expected that they would be around the same age as Subaru was presently. That said, the sight of the figures of these children that had been hidden from the gaze of the public inside of these jail cells was sickening. Tanza, however, each of their cells are spacious, and it looks thoroughly cleaned, so it does not feel like such a poor environment. Peeking inside of the solitary building from the side, Tanza added her own opinion on top of Subaru's impressions. As she had said, the space was cleaner than just the bare minimum. It seemed that the fake crown princes were being properly fed, and any who were suffering extreme weakness could not be found. Tanza, more or less, it seems like they were prepared in case one of them was the true crown prince. Beatrice, perhaps they also do not have a taste for taking the trouble to torment children, in fact. Rem, given the temperament of the homeowner, it seems like it could be either. From Tanza to Beatrice, and then to Rem, each took over to share their impressions of the inside of the solitary building. At that description, Subaru thought that the owner of this large mansion, most likely, they were an important figure in the imperial capital. Considering these circumstances, the fact that they had captured so many candidates for the black-haired crown prince like this also indicated a rebellious spirit towards the fake emperor, who understood there was no such thing as a fake crown prince. Subaru, that fact that his son is a fake, the man in question would know best. Wait a second? Is it possible that the fake emperor doesn't know? If Abel was the type of guy to be careless with his relationships with women, then... Rem, I can't say this for certain, but I can't imagine that being a side of Abel-san. Subaru, I agree. That guy, doesn't he consider his own cross-dressed self to be the most beautiful woman in the world? Looking back on the time that he had called himself Natsumi Schwartz, Abel as Bianca, and Flop as Flora, Subaru spoke of such reminiscences. At any rate. Subaru, I'm going to open the jail cells now. It's going to be pretty busy outside, with all of the rumbling and shaking, you know. Let's throw away our grudges, and all escape together. Fake crown prince, escape? But all of the cells are locked. From inside, Among the fake crown princes who came from different tribes and had different skin colors, someone said this in response, to which Subaru replied with an O. All of them had black hair and black eyes, which was not very common in this world, and so with their physical traits being similar to Subaru, while feeling a certain sense of kinship with them. Subaru, don't worry about the lock. We have a solution right here. Tanza, right here indeed. Subaru pointed his thumb towards Tanza, and the little girl bowed as she showed the broken lock in her hands to the fake crown princes. All of their faces looked surprised at this, their skeptical expressions disappearing. Instead, a sense of awe was directed towards Tanza, but Subaru, it looks like getting you out won't be a problem. Tanza over here will break you out. Rem, why yes, Subaru, where's that friend you met here that you were talking about just now? Rem, if you mean Katya-san, with her hand placed on Louis's head, Rem's expression stiffened as she turned around towards the outside of the detached annex. Judging from Rem's reaction, this Katya was probably in the main building. They succeeded in crushing the 3 zombies in the vicinity of the selfsame annex, but others had likely gotten into the mansion. They had to find a way to somehow get the girl in question out before she was discovered. Subaru, does this Katya person have any distinguishing features? Rem, she has brown, curly hair and deep eyes. And then? Subaru, and then? Flop, Miss Katya has bad legs. Because of that, while wife-san and I headed here, we had her hide in the other building. Subaru, her legs are. Subaru put his hand on his chin in response to what Flop had answered in Rem's stead. Fortunately, since they had the Galewind horse Subaru and the others had rode in on, it could be said that this was the perfect situation for carrying someone with bad legs, since their overall mobility would drop considerably anyway by taking the fake crown princes along. That would probably not be a problem. Subaru, I'm concerned that Tanza is our only decent fighter. Beatrice, the way Betty and Subaru are now, we would not be outdone by that dear girl, I suppose. Idra, although I'm not on the same level as Whites or Gustav Dono, I can put up a fight, too. Subaru, concerned about their fighting strength, received reassuring answers from Beatrice and Idra. Of course, they could not be overly reliant on Idra since they needed him to hold the Galewind horse's reins, but Subaru's skill was to make full use of the cards in his hand to optimally adapt to the situation at hand. Subaru, if I assume the role of a fake crown prince, and at least one person could ride on the horse. Rem, I'm worried about Katya-san, so if it's possible. Subaru, my bad, that's right. Looking impatient, Rem appealed to Subaru, who was trying to rack his brain. Subaru nodded back as he felt the need to quickly clear away the cause of her worries. For the time being, as long as Subaru and Beatrice were there, they could deal with the zombies. Subaru, just in case, Tanza should come along too. In order to reassure this Katya person, if Rem or Flop-san could also come, then. Subaru was just about to say that they could get by without causing any unnecessary commotion. You don't need to worry about that. I already got Katya out safely. Subaru, .. Like that, Subaru's words were cut off by a voice from outside the detached annex. No, merely being interrupted was not why his words were cut off. It was because Subaru's heart was pierced by something cold in that voice he had heard. Beatrice, Subaru. Since he held Beatrice's hand, she noticed something was wrong as his whole body instinctively grew tense. But without responding to Beatrice's words, Subaru quickly headed to the entrance of the detached annex before Rem and Flop, who were already standing there, even had a chance to turn around, to confirm who it was. And then, to keep them away from Rem. The one who was standing there and had called out was. I really have to say, this is some peculiar coincidence. How else could we end up in this situation? Subaru, .. We probably all have our own respective circumstances, but for the time being, why don't we put aside our troublesome grudges, and work together to get out of here? Thus, The man repeated Subaru's statement from just before, as if to ridicule it, and shrugged his shoulders. And so, the adversary with whom Subaru grew the most troublesome and fateful bond during his stay in the Empire, Todd Fang. Arc 8, Chapter 3, 3 Reasons. Jumping out from the entrance of the detached building, Subaru stood in front of a man who was giving a faint smile. That petrification was perhaps the most foolish choice he could have made in the face of that man. However, even for Natsuki Subaru, who had experienced all kinds of hardships, even death, over and over again, the indescribable eeriness of this man made his mind go blank. A sense of fear that not even a Sin Archbishop could bestow, and a sensation of being ensnared. In the face of Todd Fang, Subaru was made to feel that way. Subaru, bewilderment had arisen around Subaru, who stopped reflexively in response to the voice he had heard. It was Beatrice, as she held hands with him, facing the same opponent as Subaru. Other than her, Tanza and Idra were also casting a dubious gaze upon Subaru, who was standing still. Although his mind raced to the thought that he should immediately warn them to be cautious, but Rem, Katya-san. And, before Subaru could move his trembling lips, Rem shouted in a high-pitched voice. When he looked, Rem's pale blue eyes, which had turned back towards Todd by the door, no, they were directed not towards him, but directly behind him. It troubled Subaru to take his gaze off of Todd and shift his attention to that direction, but once he did, he understood the target of Rem's shout. There was a wheelchair-bound woman hiding behind Todd's back. The woman peeked at them as she grabbed the hem of Todd's clothes, with suspicious eyes that overlooked the world beneath curly brown hair. She was a perfect match for the features Rem had described. That in itself was joyful. No, the fact that she was beside Todd would mean. Rem, please stay away from her. Louis, you. Rem, who seemed to have come to the same conclusion as Subaru, raised her voice and glared at Todd. Louis, who was always close to her, also growled while looking at Todd, roused by Rem's fighting spirit. Despite losing his trademark bandana and letting down his orange hair, Todd's cruelty and dangerous creativity had probably not been diminished. Even in this situation, it was not difficult to imagine that he would try to use the woman, Katya, as a shield to manipulate Subaru and the others into doing his bidding. Of course, it was obvious from Subaru's previous hostile encounters with Todd that the outcome of giving in and doing as what was told would ultimately result in death. Subaru, from this point onwards. If I were to die, I can't be sure of how far back I'll return to. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how one looked at it, during the entire series of events of intervening in the siege of the imperial capital, breaking through the city walls, and riding into the city, Subaru had never once lost his life. Regardless of whether that was to thank, or to blame, Subaru did not know the starting point of return by death. He was able to meet up with Louis and Beatrice, and was also able to reunite with Rem and Flop. Honestly, the situation had been going well, almost too well. It was impossible to calculate how many retries it would take to reach this point. However, Subaru, I'll do what I must. If he had decided whom to save, whom to let survive, and whom to move forward with, Subaru had decided with a steadfast heart to firmly grasp that outcome. For that reason, he was able to rescue all the gladiators concerned with the Gladiator Island, and fight alongside them as members of the Pleiades Battalion until today. He would never give up, no matter what. Not even if the obstacle he needed to overcome for that purpose was the very embodiment of a fear that caused his heart to freeze over. Thus, Subaru moistened his dry lips with his tongue, and with a determined action. Katya, please wait. You've got it wrong. I haven't been captured, Rem. Rem, Katya-san? Katya, misunderstanding. Yes, it's a misunderstanding. Todd he isn't your enemy. Katya tried to move forward, turning the wheels of her wheelchair while loudly insisting that it was a misunderstanding and that Todd was not their enemy. However, Todd put a hand on her thin shoulder, preventing her from moving forward. Katya, pitching forward with vigor, glared at Todd with teary eyes, and Katya, wait, What are you doing? You are putting yourself in danger. Todd, you're the one in danger. Don't move forward on your own. Katya, who do you think I'm saying this for? Todd, of course, it's for my sake, but that doesn't mean I can overlook the woman I love putting herself into danger. Katya, ugh. Red-faced and having snapped at him forcefully, Katya was silenced by those words. That was not because of embarrassment or shame, but mainly because his objection had conveyed that he was concerned about her. Subaru found it difficult to believe that it was a perfectly honest statement without the intent of deception. Katya-san, could it be, that person is? With a small gasp, Rem asked Katya this with a fearful look. Although she did not clearly state the question, the intended point of the question was clear. Whether it was a sign of her hesitation and anxiety, but Rem had put her slender hand on Louis's shoulder. In response to this question of Rem, Katya nodded her head while biting her lip. Katya, I told you this several times already, he is, you know, my Rem, your fiancé. Katya, that's it. After her initially hesitant declaration, Katya responded clearly to Rem's question as such. Rem's eyes wavered when she was told this, and she clearly was agitated. Subaru was just as shocked as Rem, and was also shaken to his core. Subaru, fiancé. While not having the fondest memories of Todd following the events since their first encounter, the story of his fiancé left a different impression apart from his insanely cautious and unforgiving nature. Todd, who had been deployed as an imperial soldier and was encamped near the forest where the Shudrakian village was located, frequently spoke of his desire to return to his fiancée. But after a series of bloody encounters with Todd, his expectations for his humanity had faded, and it became a distant memory that merely lingered in a corner of his mind. Subaru, they really did exist. And the words were so incongruous with Todd and his lovely fiancée that he had to let it slip. Despite probably not even hearing Subaru's monologue, Rem looked at Todd with suspicion in her stern eyes. Rem, are you really Katya-san's fiancé? Todd, yeah, it's true, like I said before, it's an unconventional arrangement. I never thought that Katya and you would be getting along so well during your confinement in the Prime Minister's mansion. Rem, Todd, don't look at me like that. Of course, I'm not saying we had a good first encounter or a good relationship either, but this is the situation we're in. We both have to let go of our grudges, don't we? Shrugging his shoulders at Rem's silent gaze, Todd spoke up brazenly. Then his gaze turned not to Rem, but to Subaru. Holding his breath, Subaru met Todd's gaze. Cold sweat ran down his back. However, Todd, what the kid said is true, right? Subaru, There was no hint of hostility in Todd's demeanor as he closed one eye and winked at him. Staying true to his words, Todd had let go of his hostility and caution and was extending a hand, as if it was the obligation of the person proposing to cooperate with each other to get out of this situation. Flop, husband-kun, wife-san, who is soldier-kun? At the sight of both Subaru and Rem going silent, Flop's soft face took on a serious look. In response to his question, Subaru could not speak carelessly, partly due to his current appearance. Instead, Rem continued with that man. Rem, I've had several encounters with him before. And, each time, my life had been put in danger. Katya, While she looked at Katya, Rem tried hard to choose the right words while also telling the truth. Upon hearing this, Katya's eyes widened and she looked at Todd who stood beside her. Her lips trembled as she questioned her fiancé from his side. Katya, is that true? Todd, what Rem said. Todd, if it's about that young lady, it's true. You said it earlier, that there are some grudges. I'm an army man. Sometimes I have to turn my weapon on someone. That kind of thing, I guess it's just one of those unwanted situations. Rem, to think it was unwanted, you went out of your way to. Todd, if it was in the fortress city, it was because I saw your companion as a threat. If it was before that, I was just following orders like any other soldier. I have nothing personal against you." As he said this, Todd took the axe worn on his waist. For a moment, a tension ran through Subaru and the others, but Todd, keeping one hand outstretched, heaved it away without getting worked up. A parabolic arc was drawn as the axe slid across the ground and came under the feet of Subaru and his team. Louis, A.U. Louis picked up the axe and alternated between looking at Subaru's face and Rem's. It did not seem to be an axe-shaped bomb, but it appeared to be a pure act of disarmament. Todd raised his hands and waved at Subaru and the others who had recognized that fact. "Todd, as you can see, I'm not your enemy. Only, it would be regrettable for all of us if we wasted time glaring at each other like this, right? Flop, wife San, I too think we should talk constructively. What do you think?" Rem, Squeezing her own arm, Rem glanced sideways at Subaru. Only Subaru and Rem were able to share their wariness of Todd and the level of threat that he posed. As for their acquaintances themselves, Louis was also there when Subaru, Flop, and the others were attacked by Todd in the fortress city, but none of that danger was shown on either of their faces. Therefore, Betty will follow Subaru's decision, in fact. As she held hands with Subaru, Beatrice gave him only the courage to make a choice, without influencing him either way. She was not alone, both Tanza and Idra left the future to Subaru's choice. Just the fact that these two and Todd were in the same place was enough to make his heart freeze. If possible, he would have liked to get Todd's presence far away from them as soon as possible, but Subaru, Katya-san is a friend of Rem. I want as many of us as possible to get out of here unscathed. We don't have the time to squabble here, that's what I think. Rem, I understand, but Subaru hung his head and bit his lip, and Rem also stiffened her cheeks in frustration, but he also did not know what kind of action Todd would take if he refused him poorly. That was a concern that Rem also shared. Now that he was here, he could not let him go. It was the same reason one could not leave a bomb unattended, not knowing when it may detonate. Katya, don't worry. This guy is outrageously tenacious. I'm sure he'll be useful to help me and all of you escape. Todd, hey, come on, you shouldn't compare your fiancé to something like a Zoda bug. Seeing Subaru and Rem's state of unease, Katya clumsily backed up Todd. With a wry smile at Katya's defense, Todd then ran his hand through his own hair, and Todd, well, since you've accepted me, I'll have to return the favor. Thanks, I'll also have to prove myself to Katya, who has treated me so lightly. With that, Todd spoke like a reliable, young man, and ignoring the feelings of Subaru, who had an inescapable sense of tension that made his throat growl, he joined the others. There were 3 reasons why Subaru could not reject Todd Fang's presence in this situation. The first was the presence of Katya, Todd's fiancée. Having apparently developed a friendly relationship with Rem during her time in the mansion, she appeared to be a good person, despite her sharp-tongued nature, having properly shown Subaru and company that she was not a nefarious sort of person. From all appearances, she did not have the slightest idea of who Todd was at the root of his character, but whatever accusations Subaru and company made here, it would be a bad bet whether she would believe her fiancé or them. If so, should one, due to disliking Todd, choose to separate from Katya? Comparing it to the wheelchair Subaru had made for Rem, it was not inferior. Her leaning her weight on it looked so pitiful that he could not leave her behind. As long as Katya and Todd were intimate to the point of seeming to be one, it was only logical that they could not refuse Todd. The second was that Todd's actions were all undone in previous attempts due to return by death. With his ruthless nature and cool-headed judgment, Todd had on numerous occasions cornered Subaru, taking Subaru's life, not just that, sometimes taking the lives of Subaru's cherished friends. Now, Flop, who was accompanying Subaru, Tanza, Idra, and even others had once been killed by Todd. Subaru's strong feelings of hatred and fear toward Todd were probably due to the fact that Todd had taken the lives of his friends right before his eyes more than any other person Subaru had ever encountered in this world. However, since, as a result of return by death, these events had not actually occurred, even if Todd were to turn his blade against them, he would not have done any harm beyond that. Neither the Great Fire in the Shadrakian forest, nor the unrelenting attacks in the fortress city, nor the massacre of gladiators on Gladiator Island, none of these had happened. Only that it was possible for him to perpetrate them. And the third and final reason. Todd, aim from the chest up. Anything below the waist will only buy you some time. Subaru, Tisk, Beatrice. Beatrice, understood, in fact. Minya? At the sharp voice's instruction, Subaru and Beatrice simultaneously held their hands out in front of them. Ahead of their palms, several pale-faced enemies, zombies, were knocked down to the ground as the purple arrows were shot at them, causing them to crystallize and sending up a cloud of dust. Some of them escaped being critically hit, however. Subaru, sorry, but, even if their torso is in that state. Tanza, even if the head is intact, it will just be shattered. The zombies that were not immediately incapacitated were hit by the heel of Tanza's falling leg. Their crystallized torsos were shattered, leaving them unable to do anything after their four limbs were blown away. The head of the zombie rolled away, and without its regeneration process beginning, eventually, the still intact head lost its color and crumbled away like sand. Though, he did not want to feel heartache at the sight of it. Todd, now, we should have eliminated the obstacles in the back streets. Your guy's magic, it's working extraordinarily well on these guys, thank you. How much power can you spare? Beatrice, there is plenty more, in fact, 10,000 or 100,000 to spare, I suppose. Todd, that's reassuring. But don't try anything too rash. You guys are my lifeline. Being praised for their successful elimination of the group of zombies that was blocking their way left Subaru and Beatrice with mixed feelings. Unilaterally defeating the zombies was a sound choice, mentally. On the other hand, it was somewhat unpleasant that Todd was the one praising it. Putting aside the sentiments of Subaru and the others. Todd, I had many encounters with those pale-faced guys before I reunited with Katya at the mansion. They didn't seem to be on either side, the regular army or the rebels, and you can't communicate with them. Flop, oh, really? But we seem to be able to talk to the ones that husband Kun and the others took down in the mansion, though. Todd, being able to talk and being able to communicate are similar, but they're not the same thing at all, are they? They won't listen to you, and they won't die if you crush their heads or cut them off. They're troublesome enemies to deal with. Tanza, soldiers who do not die. Just as Schwartz-Summers' companion told us. After being told of the zombies' formidable characteristics, Flop and Tanza contemplated. However, they were considering Todd's opinion, and this was also a highly accurate analysis that Subaru could not ignore. Todd, to summarize, they can't be defeated by honest means. Swords, lances, and other weapons are only a temporary measure. The best way. Flop, is husband Kun's and dress Chan's. Tanza, magic. Todd, I've also roasted some of them to charcoal with the spirit I had in my care, and they didn't get back up. I haven't verified if it's effective with ordinary fire as well as magic fire, though. Subaru, Todd, well, in case you're wondering, it takes longer for them to revive if you hit them above the neck than if you hit them in any other part of the body. The legs regenerate surprisingly quickly, so don't expect to take away their mobility. Even Subaru, who knew his true nature, was impressed by Todd's willingness to give out such advice. As soon as the matter of accepting them into the group was settled, Todd generously shared information about the zombies, giving out information as they went along. Naturally, he, like Subaru and his group, had moved through the imperial capital, where numerous zombies roamed, to join up with Katya. Having done so, Todd likely had effective strategies against the zombies and knowledge that would help them escape. This prospect was the third reason why Subaru had welcomed Todd. Subaru, that said, I had no clue how far it went. The zombie outbreak occurred shortly after Subaru and his group had climbed over the city walls. For a moment, Subaru thought that they might have been the ones to trigger the zombie outbreak, but they decided to trample that down and move forward, as it was an unanswerable fear to consider. Regardless, from the zombie outbreak to the present, even though the time for investigation should have been around the same for both Subaru's group and Todd, the depth of the information Todd had gathered for survival was incredibly ahead. It was that attitude of his, not just toward zombies, but toward anything, anyone, anywhere, that propelled Todd's extraordinary decisiveness and ability to get things done. Katya-san, are you all right? Katya, why yeah, aside from being a little shaken up by all the unfamiliar people. What about you, are you fine? I'm much more afraid of the likes of Priscilla Summer and Madeline-san, I don't have any chance against them. Katya, those kinds of people have nasty tempers. Rem and Katya slowly lagged behind Subaru and his battle group, trying to make their way ahead. Rem was pushing Katya's wheelchair, and Louis was escorting the defenseless girls as they looked around restlessly. Because of the poor footing and choice of route to bypass the group of zombies, combined with the speed of the fake crown princes led by Idra and the Galewind horse, the speed of travel was not fast. Still, steadily, they approached the ramparts of the imperial capital. Flop, husband Kun, why the long face? Are you still concerned about Soldier Kun? Subaru, Flop-san. The complicated expression on Subaru's face, which was both happy and bitter at the same time, was seen through by Flop, who was still watching his surroundings closely. Being the astute man that he was, Flop could see that Subaru was more wary of Todd than necessary, at least, more than was necessary with the amount of information he had at this point. Of course, he could not reveal the fact that Flop had been killed before, because it would run afoul of the rules of return by death. Subaru, Flop-san, as I said before. Flop, pay attention to what Soldier Kun is up to, right? I know that, and that's why Miss Tanza stays with him as much as possible, as you had requested of her. Subaru, Flop, although you have become smaller and your face younger, your way of thinking has grown more mature and cautious, husband Kun. You always do your best to worry, and that's a virtue. But you know, suggesting cross-dressing in order to conquer the fortress city, I also like that side of you. Seeing Flop's soft and gentle smile, Subaru looked embarrassed and then gave a wry smile. Even without his current appearance, when compared to his original body, Subaru felt like he realized the older Flop's proficiency as an older brother. It was no wonder that medium had so much respect for Flop. Beatrice, HK, Subaru, look down at our feet, I suppose. Subaru, our feet. You are. When the conversation came to a close, Beatrice led Subaru by the hand, and at their feet, soaking the soles of their shoes, they saw water flowing on the inclined ground. Beyond the Crystal Palace, the reservoirs that held large amounts of water had been breached, and the volume of water flowing into the city was beginning to rise in earnest. The enemy was not only Imperial soldiers and zombies, but the water as well. If they took too long to withdraw, they would eventually be swallowed by the rising waters. Todd, if we don't get out of here before that happens, it's over for all of us. Todd, who walked over to them, clearly verbalized Subaru's sense of crisis. Subaru stiffened slightly, and whether or not Todd realized his alarm, he pointed the tip of his returned axe toward the Crystal Palace. Todd, it looks like General First Class Moguro doesn't stand a chance against the Cloud Dragon. It's only a matter of time before Moguro loses. It would be better if it were 1-on-1, but 2-on-1 is fatal. After the General First Class is defeated, how will the enemy proceed? Subaru, how they will proceed, do you have an idea? Todd, regardless of the Cloud Dragon, the Flying Dragon Rider cooperating with it looks to be a corpse. So far, all the corpses have been attacking as soon as they see us. In other words, Subaru, the zombies are trying to kill the living. Todd, it's irritating, but that's how it is. Todd tilted his head in contemplation, and Subaru understood what he was trying to say. The objective of the zombies was to exterminate every last living person they came across. For that reason, if there was a way to kill a lot of people, it would not be surprising that they would choose it. The stone giant clashing against the white dragon right in front of the castle, if it lost, the zombies would completely destroy the walls of the reservoir, causing the water to ceaselessly flood. If that happened, Subaru's group and the people of the imperial capital, along with the soldiers of the regular army and the rebel army who were fighting outside, would all be swept away. Todd, that's irritating. But, I do like the way you call them zombies. We need some kind of name for them. Let's just call them zombies from now on. Beatrice, what do you think about those zombies, in fact? Suddenly, Beatrice, who had been silent, asked Todd that question. Todd, who muttered the word zombie several times to familiarize himself with the word, made a puzzled face at Beatrice's question. Todd, what do I think? Beatrice, so far, the majority of the zombies we've encountered were Imperial soldiers just like you, I suppose. I can tell by their appearance, in fact. How do you feel about killing your own allies? Todd, first, they aren't my allies. They just wear the same clothes. If they're dead, they're not soldiers or anything. They don't need to be recognized as anything other than troublesome obstacles. Beatrice, Todd, talking about whose pawns they are and what their goals are, I don't think that's important for survival right now. That's something for the big shots to think about and solve. He gave a composed response, and Beatrice silently agreed to end the conversation. Todd shrugged his shoulders at her attitude and looked at Subaru again. Todd, you've got a reliable partner, but it would be better for you to talk it out with her if you're feeling worn out. Contrary to expectations, even just spitting out what's on your mind can do some good. Subaru, I'll keep that in mind. In response to Subaru's gloomy answer, Todd left him with the words "do it," and proceeded forth. Acting as a scout for the road ahead, Todd would find the positions of the zombies and make a plan for how to drive them back, to which Subaru and his team would then review and implement in order to secure their escape route. Currently, it was going quite well, however. Beatrice, Subaru, if you are worn out, you can talk to Betty about anything, I suppose. As Beatrice looked into Subaru's face, he looked to be mentally worn down. That was partly because he continued to devote strong vigilance towards Todd, and partly because Beatrice's magic was using his mana. But the greatest psychological burden of all was taking down the zombies. It was painful to destroy zombies that could speak and had something close to the will they had during their lifetime. How much better it would be if, like Todd, he could simply dismiss them as scarecrows blocking the way. Flop, I think that's also one of the virtues of husband Kun, though. Subaru, I don't know. Rem's going to kick my butt for hesitating again. Flop, wife San wouldn't do such a thing. Subaru, Flop, I don't think she would. Strangely, Flop's repeated words were persuasive. Flop had survived in this merciless empire with neither physical strength nor magic, but with words alone. Perhaps the single greatest weapon he possessed was his humanity. Subaru, thanks to Flop-san, I'm feeling a bit better. Flop, thank goodness. I'm useless, so if husband Kun were to get depressed, I wouldn't be able to find a way to save us. Oops, but. Subaru, but? Flop, thanks to me, I think I may have hurt Dress-chan's feelings a bit. When Flop pointed that out, Subaru turned around and said, huh? There was Beatrice, holding hands with Subaru and glaring at him with her cute, round eyes. Subaru's cheeks stiffened at her reaction, and Beatrice's cheeks flushed. Beatrice, neglecting Betty when she worried about you, lucky you, in fact. There Subaru goes again, immediately befriending a handsome guy and ignoring Betty, I suppose. Subaru, what incredible misinformation. No, I'm not ignoring you at all, okay. In the first place, though guys like Flop-san and Ceci are exceptions, Idra and Whites are nuanced while not necessarily handsome. Hyana is quite charming, though. Beatrice, there's no need to make excuses, in fact. She suddenly turned her face away from him, and Subaru moaned in pain as if his chest had been brutally gouged out. Beatrice was also worried about him. Although Flop had phrased his words more skillfully, he felt regret towards Beatrice from the bottom of his heart. No matter what, after escaping from this place, he had to entirely devote himself to making it up to Beatrice. Subaru, for now, all I can do is caress you earnestly with my hand. Rem, what do you think you are doing in a situation like this? Subaru, wow. Subaru was surprised when someone called out to him from behind. Rem, who cast Subaru a dubious look, still had Louis clinging to her waist as she looked around the vicinity warily and said, Rem, even if you take such a form, your personality surely doesn't change. Subaru, oh? Does that mean that you know my nature well enough to understand who I am? Rem, correction. Now that your body has shrunk, your restraint has become non-existent compared to before. Subaru, that's the part I'd really like you to laugh at and let slide, blaming it on the wild nature of a child. Even Rem's harsh opinion was a pleasant stimulus for Subaru, after having been separated from her for some time. Subconsciously, Subaru tightened his face and appeared to be happy, being careful to not make Rem uneasy. In addition to that, speaking of someone that he did not want to make anxious. Katya, hey, is Todd bothering you? Is he properly being of use? Subaru, Katya, pushed in a wheelchair by Rem, hesitantly asked. Compared to the fake crown princes who had been released from confinement and followed Subaru and his group on their own as they retreated, Katya was experiencing a considerable sense of helplessness in not being able to move on her own. She seemed to be terribly worried about Todd as well as herself, and it was clear that she had a shy affection for Todd, her fiancé. Seeing Katya's genuine concern, Subaru turned towards the end of the alley where Todd was headed. Subaru, yeah, he's being useful, he has a good nose and good eyesight. His precise directions have really helped us avoid trouble. Katya, I see. That's good then. Katya, her eyes downcast, patted herself on the chest in relief. As aggravating as it was, those were not thoughtless words said just to reassure Katya, but a fair assessment of Todd's work up to that point. In fact, as a soldier, Todd's work had been impeccable. His scouting and route selection had contributed greatly to their survival in this current situation of having to flee, even with the hindrance of having to move a large number of people. Todd did not have an effective way to strike the zombies, but he was outstanding at exposing them to the attacks of Subaru and Beatrice, who did have effective skills. Except for Subaru suffering more mental wear due to the higher amount of loss than necessary, there were no disadvantages to Todd's presence. Subaru, no, Rem, whose interactions with Katya seemed to be complicated, was also under the same mental strain due to Todd's presence as Subaru. Subaru, at this rate. Would they really all be able to escape out of the imperial capital together without incident? While Subaru struggled with unanswerable questions about how he wished for things to proceed. Todd, Katya, I told you to stay farther back, didn't I? Don't catch up to us. Todd, who had been away scouting, returned and found Katya with Subaru and the others, and gave caution to his fiancée. At Todd's words, an expression of relief for Todd's safety rose on Katya's face, then it quickly turned into a look of opposition towards the words, and then her expression changed once again. She seemed to be a bit worried about Todd's appearance. Katya, Todd, did something happen? Todd, good grief, she's so intuitive only at times like these. As he said this, Todd ran a hand through his bandana-less hair and revealed what he had seen as he looked towards Subaru and the others. That was. Todd, there's a rather tough-looking zombie just ahead from here, a member of the Cyclops tribe. He was probably the one who stood out the most in today's battle. So he spoke. Arc 8, Chapter 4, Warrior's Instinct. The giant Ismail was a valiant warrior of the Cyclops tribe and the hope of his clan. In the center of his valiant face, a large blue eye fixed its gaze clearly on the future without hesitation. No, it had once fixed its gaze. Now, Ismail's single eye was as if a golden moon had emerged in an otherwise moonless night, the very manifestation of an evil omen. Ismail, In order to bring fame and prestige to his tribe, Ismail resolutely threw down the gauntlet in the battle for the imperial capital, and entered the battlefield as a rebel aiming to take the head of the Emperor Vincent Volachia. True to his reputation, he quickly broke through the defenses of the regular army and reached the city walls. However, that was as far as Ismail's advance went. The unleashed hellfire thoroughly burned down the giant Ismail, and all the warriors of the Cyclops tribe who followed him. Despite surviving on the border between life and death, he ultimately lost his life by the pursuit of an emotionless assassin dagger. Indeed, he had lost his life. That was what should have been. Ismail, his body, blown to shreds by artillery fire, certainly ought to have died. Nevertheless, Ismail's body, hideously burned and blown asunder, grew new limbs and rose, and while carrying his weapon, his battle-axe, on his shoulder, he walked through the imperial capital, ravaged by war as it was. Moving his cold, lifeless body with nothing more than fervently surging emotions of abhorrence and hatred. Ismail, where are you, you damned repulsive beast? Todd, up until now, we've only faced small fries, and haven't come across anyone on the level of a former general, but the opponent ahead of us will be more than a match for that. As such, he is quite troublesome. Subaru, when you say general. Todd, there may be exceptions who are evaluated for their military tactics and strategic acumen, but in most cases, it's their own skill that counts. This guy is one of those. Not comparable to a general first class, but he definitely has the potential to become a general second class. Subaru, Todd, if we were to compare by simple ability, he could probably kill all of us by himself. With a nonchalant attitude, Todd wrapped up his hopeless report with their annihilation, thus pointing out how deadly the formidable zombie that awaited them was to the group, and that the dumb luck that had protected them until now had run out. Katya, but you're a cunning guy, you can figure something out, right? You've done so well so far, with the help of these kids. Katya said, her voice had risen while her eyes clung to Todd. The kids she referred to were Subaru and Beatrice, who were magically crystallizing zombies, and Tanza, who was destroying enemies who might have slipped through. Fortunately, Louis had not had to step in to protect Rem and the rest of the followers so far, and the two main attackers, together with Todd's good judgment, had paved the way for the team's success so far. However, Todd, when there is a certain level of parity and strength, brute force can be effective. However, when facing an opponent with a significant power gap, it becomes meaningless. No matter how hard the wind blows, it cannot bring down a castle. Katya, Flop, so, you think it's going to be tough going down this road, soldiercun? Todd, yes. I'd say that, but we can't change our path so easily. He nodded halfway through Flop's words, and then he shook his head. He then turned his head to the path they came from, the Crystal Palace. Todd, what's more, that side has finished their battle. The water will be arriving soon. As Todd emotionlessly pointed out, a roar dominated the sky in the far distance. As they looked in the same direction as him, they saw a huge humanoid figure that clashed with the dragon near the Crystal Palace. Both of its knees were destroyed and its crumpled body fell to the ground, breaking the castle's perimeter. Behind the dense plume of smoke, the white dragon that defeated the colossal god unleashed a battle cry. No creature, zombies included, would not be able to comprehend that the sound that echoed loudly was that of a battle cry, given that scene. Todd, if our earlier guess is correct. Subaru, I don't know if we can make it in time to go back the way we came and find another route. Beatrice, I suppose. It was a conclusion that could drive them further and further into a corner, but as they put into words the course of events that they had no choice but to consider, Beatrice, who had joined hands with Subaru, also affirmed Subaru's thought. Todd pulled back his chin in response, and Tanza raised her hand modestly. Well, she said. Tanza, then the situation is deadlocked, correct? We have a powerful enemy in front of us, but even if we went back, time would not allow it. Flop, Miss Tanza, that is a very scary conclusion. It's true that if we only consider the information we've been told, then it does feel like a deadlock, which is really uneasing, but I'm sure there are moves left that we can take. Tanza, for example, what? Flop, that's not for me to know, though. I'm sure someone is here who might, right? In response to Flop's statement, Tanza, who had had difficulty changing her emotions, furrowed her round eyebrows and turned her gaze. In situations like this, it made Subaru happy and grateful that people thought of him when the topic of someone they could rely on came up. There was pressure too, but it also made him feel like he had to meet their expectations. Furthermore, Rem, can you manage it somehow? Indeed, Tanza was not the only one who had high hopes for Subaru. Subaru, Rem, who was pushing the wheelchair holding Katya and clutching the handle to the point that her fingers had turned white, asked him this question with shaking pale blue eyes. Compared to the total trust that Katya, who was just in front of her, had for Todd, it was something as fragile as a sandcastle or thin ice. Even so, Subaru's heart was excited. Having been vigilant towards Todd, who was accompanying them, Subaru was able to pull his attention back to the task at hand and utilize his mind to its fullest. Todd, if we don't decide quickly on whether to go or return, we won't make it in time. While Subaru was brainstorming, Todd had added requirements as if to remind him, if they went, all they needed was strength. If they were going back, all they needed was luck and time. If he assumed he would return by death, the latter might have a better chance of success. Subaru, no, I can't say that for certain. If he kept repeating return by death and eliminated the wrong routes, they might eventually reach another way out by the shortest route, assuming that there was a goal. If they could not make it in time by whatever route they took, they could not choose the latter option. On the other hand, if the option to fight was chosen, Subaru, whether we can fight a strong enemy or not is. Among the group fleeing with Subaru, only Beatrice with Subaru, Louis, Tanza, and Todd could have been counted as having decent fighting strength, with Idra as a backup. Of these, Subaru was like a bonus for Beatrice, and wanted to entrust Idra with escorting non-combatants such as Rem and Katya, Flop and the fake crown princes. In effect, there were 4 people who could serve as combatants: Beatrice, Louis, Tanza, and Todd. Magnificently, the only people he could trust were young girls, and he did not have the time to laugh it off. That was what Subaru was just thinking. Subaru, Subaru looked up with his hand on his chin in contemplation, and his gaze met with Todd's, who happened to look in Subaru's direction at the same moment. At that instant, lightning flashed in Subaru's head, and the electrifying feeling of it felt very reliable and bitter. The reason was, Subaru and Todd, let's beat that zombie. Because Subaru was acutely aware in his soul that they had both intuited their mutual conclusion at the same time, and that what it would take to accomplish it would be a combination of strength and wisdom. Ismail turned himself around the moment he heard a loud noise, one unlike the others in his environment. Ismail, His old, burned body was replaced by a brand new, cracked one. Ismail, hero of the Cyclops tribe, took a wide stance and lowered his posture to capture the approach of a large shadow in his single eye. As Ismail stood in the street, flying parabolically above his head was, as if by some joke, one of the houses that made up the imperial city that had been pulled out of the street in its entirety. It was forcibly torn from the ground and thrown, spilling pieces all over the ground and walls, scattering like crumbs from a loaf of bread. In reality it was not that cute, and most people would certainly be crushed to death. Even still. Ismail, how slow. The giant eye Ismail was outside the bounds of most people. The flying house was on a trajectory to land in the center of the street, leaving only in front of and behind him as escape routes, since the left and right sides were tightly blocked. But, that they purposefully provided an escape route, meant he would have to play right into their hands. Therefore, Ismail did not flee forward or backward, but raised his battle axe instead. It was a huge axe that would even be difficult for 2 strong warriors to lift, but Ismail easily maneuvered it and could cut through any obstacle with ease. On this occasion, the same fate befell the throne house. At the moment of contact, the blade of the axe slashed directly up from below, entered the front edge of the house, and sliced the large house into 2 vertical sections with a slash like cutting a large man all the way across from the groin. The severed house could no longer fulfill its role as a home as the furniture, dishes, and clothing left by the homeowners smashed into the streets, all without dealing any damage to Ismail's physical body. However, Ismail, HK. Immediately after unleashing his spectacular move, a rock came right for Ismail's face. Of course, this would not work against the Cyclops tribe, whose eyesight was unparalleled compared to that of other races. As he tilted his head, dodged the flying projectile, and ducked into the swirling dust left by the house, Ismail squinted his eye. The enemy was in the same direction from which both the house and the stone had been thrown. The pupil technique of the Cyclops tribe allowed Ismail's view of the world to be switched. Ismail's eye, which was capable of using color to capture the emotions of a target, saw multiple flickers of red coming from the direction of the thrown attack. The color of the will to fight. That in itself was desirable, and Ismail's whole body became filled with strength. During this siege of the imperial city, or in a battle against bandits or any other race, there was nothing more degrading than fighting those who did not bear the color of a warrior. Warrior against warrior, fighter against fighter, it is only in such battles that there is value in a contest of skill. The source of the animosity that drove Ismail's supposedly dead body was great towards those that had defiled the honor of such universal martial arts. Ismail, it's a fight. Stepping onto the dirt-strewn streets, Ismail's body advanced toward the enemy. The same stone projectiles that were thrown from before tried to intercept him, and the next massive projectile, a house, followed in a parabolic trajectory, although he did not think it was cowardly or a weak man's tactic. Only that it was a fine tactic, that he held respect for, and needed to destroy. Ismail, a warrior's death must come at the hands of a warrior. The speed and accuracy of the incoming stones were quite high, although he responded with a minimal amount of ducking and parrying with his raised battle-axe. It would be inevitable that his bones would be shattered if he were to receive a proper hit. Needless to say, the massive house that was thrown into the air was a projectile with such force that it would immediately render its target incapacitated. However, Ismail, don't think it's your exclusive right to send something flying. The howling Ismail swung his battle-axe, blowing away the second house cannonball, and drove the edge of his weapon into the street with such force that it ripped away the ground of the imperial capital. Continuing to rip up the ground, Ismail swung his long leg around and launched a kick that blew it forward like a buckshot. Naturally, he did not expect this to be an effective strike against the enemy across the street. Ismail, it's just a distraction, but unlike the Cyclops tribe, other races that did not possess special eyes would be unable to see through a curtain of dust that danced around them. Ismail hid within the dust and shattered street debris, which clearly lowered his chance of being hit by the stones being thrown at him, and had a reprieve to advance further. Ismail, a big man and a little girl. As Ismail peeped through the curtain of smoke, he could clearly see the other side and could make out that there was a man and a girl. The man took the role of keeping Ismail in check with stones, and the small girl beside him pulled entire houses from the ground and threw them into the air as massive projectiles. It was a well-coordinated effort, but at the same time, what was disconcerting was the inexperienced way in which they acted. Ismail, who had honed his skills on the battlefield, understood. Neither of the two, who had gone on the offensive, were genuine warriors. Nevertheless, they had somehow developed a warrior's spirit, which Ismail, who was the target of the attack, indeed respected. Sometimes, the battlefield could transform a non-warrior into a warrior in an instant. The same thing was happening with that man and the girl. Ismail, magnificent. Voicing his praise, paying them respect, he must kill them, no matter what. With absolute perfection, with no hesitation whatsoever, without even the slightest of errors, he must thoroughly slaughter them. Eradicating every last part of their lives, he must choke the very life out of them. He must tear them limb from limb, rip off their heads, and drink in the blood of their eviscerated hearts. Ismail, He could feel the fierce craving for death, blood, and lives flaring up within his own mind. At the same time, as Ismail tore through the third house cannonball, a shrill noise resounded as the window glass shattered, and he saw himself reflected therein. Ismail was smiling. The corners of his mouth contorted as if to applaud the malevolent heat that was flowing through his cold body, in which no real blood circulated. It was a heinous smile reeking of naught but blood, one that had never once been worn on his face when he was still alive. Ismail, ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. Instead of feeling repugnance at that smile, a vehement exhilaration boiled inside of him, and erupted with the sound of laughter. As he laughed, and kept laughing, he struck down a lucky shot from the stones that were flying in his direction. Plunging towards the next house cannonball, he tore through it with his battle-axe as he made his suicide attack. They continued to hurl things at him while they retreated back, and he leapt towards the two warriors. No, he leapt towards his prey. Slamming his battle-axe towards the fifth building, which seemed to be their final resistance, Ismail would try to bless the applause of his boiling blood with real blood, and as expected, only having one eyeball really confines your vision, doesn't it? Ismail, . The house flew in a parabolic arc, and, tearing down its front door with his axe, he would propagate the destructive power, and cause the entirety of the bending building materials to burst like a bubble. Just before that could happen, somebody's ridicule struck Ismail's eardrums. No, absolutely not. That was not the ridicule of just somebody. For Ismail, that voice was the utmost abhorrent, a symbol of malevolence, a target of detestation. Ismail, you. His raised morale from just before had vanished, and a chilly bloodlust dominated Ismail's entire body. The one seen by Ismail's widened, black-stained, golden eye was a single orange-haired imperial soldier, lying flat on the floor of the destroyed house. Undoubtedly, he was the sworn enemy who had brought about Ismail's death. Ismail, Ra'ah. That instant, twisting his body in a burst of rage, Ismail's battle-axe changed its trajectory. It changed from a vertical axe strike which would have split the house right in half, to a slanted trajectory in an instant, and was about to strike down upon the prone imperial soldier. Ismail, oh! Just before he could drive all of his might into his sworn enemy, the imperial soldier suddenly vanished from Ismail's field of view, as the latter rode the motivation of his own war cry. It was not something of this dimension, like moving at an intense speed. Quite literally, he had vanished. Ismail, . The next moment, Ismail's thoughts were completely painted over by black and white. The hatred that had burst out towards his sworn enemy had lost its destination, and his mind was dominated by the blankness caused by such a strange phenomenon. But, just before that moment, Ismail's giant eye had perceived a discrepancy. It had perceived a young girl of long, golden hair, clung to the leather belt of his prone sworn enemy's detestable form. Ismail, . The reason and intention was unclear, however, he did not think that information was irrelevant. Even though the time of contact was short, there was no way that the imperial soldier would thoughtlessly carry unnecessary things, such was the negative trust that stole Ismail's thoughts away. Thereupon, Ismail, Gar? A piercing impact bore through Ismail's left shoulder, and he released a cry of pain. Within the house where the destruction had been interrupted, what pierced through the walls and struck Ismail, whether it was precisely aimed or just a lucky shot, was a stone fired at a high speed. He thought his bones would break if struck by that, and in accordance with that belief, that force caused Ismail's left shoulder to violently explode, and as a result, Ismail's body would begin to scream, but that did not come to pass. Ismail's body had lost the color of blood, and cracks had formed in several places on his skin. When the stone struck him, a terribly short sound rang out, and it shattered. It was just as if Ismail himself was the same as the window glass of the destroyed houses. Ismail, . For a moment, as his left arm shattered, Ismail's thoughts came to a standstill. However, while he was surprised, the absence of the expected pain prevented his thoughts from being shredded to pieces. Consequently, he was able to be at ease without overlooking the next change. Ismail, my arm. His arm, shattered at the shoulder and fallen to the floor of the inclined house, regenerated through inexplicable movements as if time was turning back, cracks were filled, shattered fragments returned, and it was restored. In less than 2 seconds, it was as if the shattering had never even happened. Ismail, ha! He promptly switched the battle-axe from his right hand to his freshly repaired left hand, and with the intention of ascertaining the feel of it, Ismail fired off an axe strike, this time blasting the half-destroyed house cannonball. Destroying the building constructed with a mix of stone and wood, Ismail bathed in the debris as he broke through to the outside, then, he reached out his right hand towards the approaching sense of hostility. He caught a flying fist-sized stone head-on with his widely opened right hand. If he did not avoid the impact, the bones in his right hand would obviously be painfully demolished. But Ismail's body deviated from how a human body would be broken, and would break down like inorganic matter instead. Then, it had been restored to its original state with higher regenerative ability than a human body's ability to recover. Ismail, this is the true nature of this body. Unconsciously averting his attention from the unnatural situation in which he was placed, Ismail moved with a burning hatred. Granted to him via an incomprehensible resurrection, this repulsive body distanced Ismail from the concepts of blood, pain, and even that which was indispensable to life, the very concept of death. In that case, Ismail, ha! Exhaling, Ismail saw below him the sight he desired. The man and young girl who had been resolutely attacking Ismail for some time now, the one standing right behind them was his cowardly sworn enemy who had vanished just before his attacks could reach him. With an unknown technique, the moment he vanished from Ismail's eye, he appeared behind those two, and the warriors joined forces with the coward. At that moment, his admiration for the warriors from just before reversed, and transformed into a thick hatred. Ismail, all of you, pay for this mockery of war with your lives. Kicking the fragments of the house that had been blown away, Ismail's body flew like an arrow. As his body headed straight towards the villains, the young girl decided that there was not enough time to get to the next house, and so she began throwing stones like the bearded man standing next to her. However, Ismail, it's no use, it's no use. Without wielding his battle-axe to hit them away, the stones caught Ismail at high speed. However, neither could they stop Ismail's actions, nor could they discourage his heart. Even if a part was struck by a stone and shattered, it was instantly restored, and he suffered no damage. With a new body that had relinquished the true feeling of life, Ismail tried to attain the true feeling of life from others by bathing in their blood, and so, towards the stiffened faces of his enemies. Ismail, Trying to reach his hand out, he became aware of something. The bearded man, the young girl in a kimono, the imperial soldier whom he had decided was his hated archenemy, none of their expressions had died. The bearded man and girl appeared red, while his sworn enemy appeared blue once again. It happened at the moment he ascertained those colors. Ismail sensed the arrival of a presence behind him as he leapt toward his enemies. Ismail, HK. Ismail's warrior instinct sounded an alarm, and he spun around in midair to look up at the presence. With his giant eye opened wide, reflected in his golden eye was a person who had somehow managed to get behind him in an instant. No, it was not just one person. There were 3 figures. A young boy with black hair, and held in his arms was a young girl in a dress. And, the young blonde girl, who should have just been by his sworn enemy, was clinging to the boy's back. All 3 were small, however, burning with bright red fighting spirits. They raised their hands. L. At the murmured incantation, Ismail's warrior instincts immediately tried to react by kicking off the debris. However, restraining those instincts, Ismail stretched his arm in order to swing his battle-axe. Without dodging the attack of his enemies, without stopping it, he would bask in it as he performed his counterattack. An attack that would have been impossible with his former body, was now a possible slashing attack that could slaughter his enemies, and... Minya. An amethyst glow was fired, and Ismail dared to catch it as it flew straight towards him. He, who had planned to counterattack from there, had not even realized it. He had not realized that the hero of the Cyclops tribe, the giant Ismail, would have never made such a foolish choice. Arc 8, Chapter 5, Forgiveness. Todd, they've only recently turned into zombies. Some of them were alive just a few hours ago. Those who died in this battle are coming back to life one after another. But we can't say for sure yet. Subaru, but I understand what you mean about them having just turned into zombies. It's like they don't know what their own weaknesses are. We aren't the only ones who don't know much about zombies. Todd, they themselves are the same. However, if they have a head to speak, they probably have a head to think as well. The more time we give them, the more they can fill in those unknown parts, and the more their possible weaknesses disappear. Subaru, that's why we need to strike before the enemy becomes fully prepared. Oh. Todd, what? What did you notice? Subaru, Todd, don't be coy, just say it. Subaru, I'm not being coy. It's just that zombies don't really understand their own bodies. So if we inform them instead. He let Louis cling to his back and squeezed Beatrice tightly against his chest. The same basic position as when they were riding on the back of the Galewind horse. However, the situation they were placed in was quite extreme, and he did not have time to worry about the girls. The surrounding scenery changed in an instant, and soon after, beside a house that was shattered by a furious blow, Subaru and his allies appeared in the air, taking the back of the hostile zombie. Tanza, who threw houses, and Idra, who threw rubble, attacked in waves. It was a pretty funny warfare strategy when put into words, but it was not only the words that were funny, but the picture as well. This was not about why the child was throwing the larger ones and not the adult. In the first place, the tactic of throwing a house itself was ridiculous. Nevertheless, Tanza, since I am receiving Yorna Summer's love, then I have to do at least this much. Since she reliably accepted it like this, the impact of the scene could be shelved for now. In fact, the mysterious enhancement of the entire Pleiades battalion applied to Idra as well, but it was not as good as Tanza, who had stacked Yornas as well. It was all about being the right person at the right place. From that perspective, their opponent's attention was drawn by the wave attacks using big and small tools. Once their focus was on Todd, Subaru and his allies made a surprise teleport attack. Subaru, the zombie twisted in midair. The enemy, with his distinctive one-eyed face, blackened the white part of the large eye in the center of his face, while his golden pupil glowed brightly. A terribly cruel, blood-scented evil sneer was etched upon his mouth, sending shivers down Subaru's spine. Was he always the type of person who would laugh hysterically in the midst of battle? Or perhaps he had changed since he became a zombie. They did not know which one it was. However, Beatrice and Subaru, Quickly, Subaru and Beatrice simultaneously held up their hands and pointed them at the enemy in front of them. If their opponent showed a move to avoid Subaru and Beatrice's attack with the utmost effort and no hesitation, then their strategy would fail. In that case, then perhaps, even with their best efforts, they would not be able to surpass this enemy. But that would not happen. Because Subaru and his team forced them into this situation. Ismail, HK. Sure enough, the zombie turned around with a startling gait and, catching Subaru and the others in its large single eye, took a posture of swinging his battle-axe in his grip instead of taking evasive action. It was a strategy that involved taking Subaru and crew's attack, then defeating them with a counter-attack, the traditional tactic of incurring damage so as to inflict greater damage on your foe, but the desperation put into the attack here was different. The zombie's body regenerated inflicted wounds in little to no time. That was why the enemy thought that they could take Subaru and his team's attack with no risk, and then use it to launch their own counterattack. Unfortunately, Beatrice and Subaru, Minya. Unbeknownst to them, that was the path to defeat that Subaru and his allies had carved out. With his battle-axe swung to counter-attack, the enemy took a serious hit from the purple arrows released from the hands held up by Subaru and Beatrice. 3 brightly shimmering, amethyst crystal arrows pierced the left half of the Cyclops' body. Ismail, brilliant tactic, but, without paying attention to the purple arrows that had pierced him, the enemy bared his teeth and howled at his prey, Subaru and his friends. A zombie's body, oddly enough, broke in a brittle manner when it was shattered, much like pottery cracking, even though it retained some strength. His broken body would then be repaired like a video played backwards, and the zombie would attack as if nothing had happened. Ismail, at. But he could not do it. The amethyst arrows that had pierced the zombie's body did not shatter its body from there, but rather remade the body into the same amethyst crystals as the arrow. The crystallized part of the zombie's body then cracked, and this time the zombie's body shattered, but the parts did not regenerate. The particular effectiveness of yin magic against zombies, that was the enemy's weakness that had been identified during their retreat up to this point. Although there was not an abundance of opportunities to check over a long period of time, several common characteristics were observed in the zombies. For example, a zombie's fatal wound was closer to the heart than the head. However, since piercing their chest would not kill them, fatal may not be the right word. Nevertheless, it was a fact that the zombies, which regenerated wounds on their bodies with abnormal resilience, healed more slowly when the wounds were close to their heart. Since blood did not flow when an arm or leg was lost, it seemed that the heart probably no longer served to pump blood to the body, but it had not lost its function as a vital part of the human body. As those characteristics of zombies that could not be beaten were revealed, it was Beatrice's yin magic that was recognized to be effective at defeating zombies. Beatrice explained that the yin magic Minya had the effect of freezing the time of the target, which was a kind of instant death magic, and it seemed to be especially effective against zombies, who relied on their regeneration. According to Todd, if one burned a zombie's body down to ashes, they could stop the enemy from regenerating just as if they had hit them with Minya, but there was no use in asking for something one did not have. Subaru, this is the strongest use of the hand we have. Regardless of the strength of the enemy zombies, they could be defeated if they were hit with Beatrice's Minya. In that case, the result of thinking about a strategy to hit it was to make the enemy, who continued to demonstrate its ability in life, understand the merit of becoming a zombie. Beatrice, they are not damaged by attacks. If one gets attacked and finds that they can heal quickly, anyone would contemplate relying on that power, I suppose. Subaru, before he turned into a zombie, I'm sure he would have easily avoided that. Louis, oh. It was a declaration of victory for Subaru, Beatrice, and Louis, or rather, both admiration and pity for their enemy. This warrior who came back to life as a zombie was undoubtedly quite the skilled warrior in life. Even as a zombie, there was no discernible change in his fighting ability, but there was a distortion in the ideology with which he approached battle. If only he had not been so arrogant as to think that receiving an attack would not be a problem. Subaru, there was no way he could have seriously taken that shot. Ismail, The zombie's eye widened as it spun with the shock of the magic he was exposed to. The look in his eye was a whirlpool of mixed emotions, a mixture of astonishment and understanding as he realized his defeat. Subaru bit his lower lip and cursed the unreasonable fate that had befallen this warrior. Even if Subaru was cursed at for crystallizing the left half of his body and making him taste death for the second time. Tanza, Schwartz Summer. Immediately after a moment of sentimentality washed over his heart, Subaru was called by Tanza in an urgent voice, and he suddenly realized the truth of the situation. Spinning in the air, turning away, and then turning back to face him, the look in the enemy zombie's eye had changed color. It was not as if the color of the dead's distinctive golden eye had changed, but the astonishment and understanding that had been floating in it had faded, and it had been replaced by an intense hostility. At one point, the enemy almost accepted his defeat along with the impact. That had changed the complexion of his eye. Perhaps Subaru's last word was the catalyst. Ismail, not yet. Subaru, he's not dead. In front of Subaru, who gasped at the sight in front of him, the enemy, whose crystallization was advancing across the left side of his body, kicked something into the air. It was a fragment of a shattered house cannonball. Even though it was just a fragment, It was as big as a person's head. Kicking it into the air, the impact shattered the zombie's left arm from the shoulder and blew it away. In return, the flying debris instead flew straight at Subaru's face. Louis, wow. Just before he was hit, Subaru had a vision of his skull being shattered by the fragment. It would have been a fatal blow, but it did not reach Subaru. Because a figure, Louis, intervened before it hit Subaru, and took his place. Subaru, Louis. Clinging to his back, Louis forcefully pushed Subaru's body down, moving him out of the path of the debris and into the line of fire herself instead. As a result, Louis caught the debris without protection, was torn from Subaru's body, and was blown away. Beatrice, Subaru, don't look away, in fact. Beatrice called out to the distracted Subaru as Louis was blown away. She kept her body in Subaru's arms and reached out her hand to attack the enemy. However, the opponent was not so simple-minded as to be fatally struck twice. Ismail, HK. With fragments of his arm flying through the air, the enemy skillfully read Beatrice's pursuit with Minya and used what little remained of his left shoulder area to receive it. He took on the damage in areas that were already crystallized, minimizing the progress of damage caused by the progression of the cracks. It was truly the skill of an exceptional warrior. Louis, Yue. As soon as he was awed by his skill, Subaru's collar was grabbed by an outstretched arm. He had abandoned his battle axe. No, after losing the ability to wield the battle axe, he displayed his obsession to not let Subaru escape. Ismail, oh. Subaru, Gar. Subaru's body, which held Beatrice, was forcefully sent to the ground by the pull of the enemy's arm. Choking from the pain of his back hitting the hard surface, Subaru saw the form of the enemy up close and tried to quickly raise his hand. But, however, the opponent's determined form met his gaze, and his movement stopped. The way he looked, full of ambition and the will to fight, it was hard to believe that it was from an already dead body. Subaru, HK. Beatrice, Subaru. Tanza, Schwartz Summer. Subaru's neck was constricted and desperate voices struck his eardrums as he gasped. Hearing those impatient voices and the sound of the bones in his neck fatally creaking, Subaru's arms still did not rise. It was not that he was deprived of strength, but rather that his heart was no longer inspired. Even though he knew that if he did not do it, he would die. Even though he knew that if he did not kill, he would be killed. Beatrice, Minya. Subaru, unable to move, was supplanted by Beatrice, who had leaned in and fired her magic at the enemy. Covering Subaru resulted in also covering Beatrice, who was in his arms. Naturally, the magic reached the target from a distance that ought to have been called point-blank range. However, the enemy endured. The right arm that had tightened around Subaru's neck was defended to the death, and even if its torso was crystallized, the enemy at least tried to take him along with them. Todd, it's because you are being strangely merciful. Immediately after such nonchalant words were spoken, the head of the enemy, which was trying to kill Subaru with its burning eye, was severed at the neck. Instead, emerging on the other side of the vanished enemy's head was a stone-cold-looking Todd. Subaru, Todd swung the axe in his hand and decapitated the zombie. The head that was lopped off by Todd tried to turn its hatred toward him. Tanza, how dare you? And then Tanza's diving kick ruthlessly blew its head away. As it was, the Cyclops' head continued to bounce down the street like a soccer ball. Then the torso, which was left behind by its head, slowly crumbled, turning entirely into deep purple crystals. Tanza, are you all right, Schwartz Summer? Subaru, cough, I'm fine. Sorry, thanks for the help. Shaking off shards of the enemy's collapsed torso, Subaru lifted his hand to Tanza, who was running toward him, assuring her that he was unharmed. Tanza was relieved to hear Subaru's response, and then Subaru's face turned into an expression of sudden realization. Subaru, Louis. Where's Louis? She covered me and... Idra, it's nothing serious, it seems. Although it looks like she got hit by a piece of debris and has a concussion, the hasty Subaru received an answer from Idra, who was crouched a short distance away. At his feet lay Louis, her upper body propped up, blood streaming from her forehead, her head swaying unsteadily. Subaru, her head isn't looking good. Beatrice, please. Beatrice, dash. Of course, I know, I suppose. Subaru, please. Subaru took in Louis's condition and rushed to his feet, pulling Beatrice's arm. For a moment, there was hesitation in her demeanor, but Subaru did not notice it. Beatrice was the only one currently present who could use healing magic. The other user, Rem, was asked to go with the non-combatants to bypass the area of battle toward the inner city in order to avoid an all-out battle against a strong enemy. The more they were able to pull the strong enemies away from beside the ramparts, the more likely it was that they would be able to get out of the city safely, but this is where the impact of the lack of possible healers came into play. Subaru, Louis, you're going to be okay. Subaru crouched down beside Louis with Beatrice as she held her hand over the wound on her forehead, while Beatrice activated the healing magic. Subaru held Louis's hand. Subaru's tight grip was returned weakly, and Subaru uttered a repeated "I'm sorry." All he could do was apologize. For it was completely Subaru's fault. Todd, so that girl can use healing magic, too? You've sure got a lot of people with rare powers around. Todd then called out to Subaru, who was watching over Louis's treatment. He carried the axe that had decapitated the enemy's head on his shoulder, fixing his gaze on Subaru's slightly tense figure. Todd, and yet, if you keep going the way you are, their talent is going to go to waste. You're aware of that, aren't you? Subaru, Todd. Todd, those who place confidence that they will not die in anything other than their own strengths are weak. Subaru, Todd, this applies not only to the Cyclops we just killed, but to you as well. The reason why he could not respond to those indifferent words was because they had unmistakably hit the mark. That moment of weakness that passed through Subaru's mind as he saw his enemy shake off his looming defeat and grasped at victory, it was, as Todd said, the result of being overwhelmed by a thirst for life. Subaru was not so naive as to dismiss it as a matter of course, but, Tanza, is it not rude to speak like that? Todd, Tanza, Schwartz-Summer is someone who was of great contribution to the current battle. The way you talk about him, pointing that out, is. Todd, don't snap at me. I acknowledge his contributions. It's just that I think they're insufficient. That, and the person who was of greatest contribution was either you or the girl that's collapsed over there. Tanza's cheeks stiffened when Todd stated that, pointing his chin towards the girl. The girl who had taken a major role against such a strong opponent upon herself, did not seem to care about the praise directed at her, but was rather worried about Subaru, who was hit with those heartless words. She was a girl who scarcely altered her facial expression, but the feelings she kept hidden inside were rather strong. Since the Gladiator Island, she had considerably deepened her relationship with Subaru, and so when he was insulted, she understandably displayed an attitude of anger on Subaru's behalf. The absence of Todd's fiancée, Katya, from this situation also added to the intensity of her tone. Tanza, do you consider yourself to be correct no matter what? In that case. Todd, I said, don't snap at me. What I said is just a fact. That there are monsters out there who are so incredibly strong that they can be sure they won't die, and that there are others who think they won't die for an external reason to that. Neither you nor I are either of those things. Tanza, that is. Todd, if the former is an ally, things go easily, but I wouldn't want the latter to be an ally. If they're an enemy, you'll be able to take advantage of them, like we did just now. Your friend's plan was spot on. Tanza, HK, you do not speak for Schwartz-Summer. Had she tried to snap at him with such words? With her face slightly flushed with anger, Tanza tried to snap at Todd, but, quicker than Subaru could stop her, Idra intervened. While he was supporting Louis's body, he called out her name, Tanza. Idra, that's enough. This isn't like you. Your inherent flavor is that you always keep your cool, right? Tanza, it is just that I am unskilled at managing the fluctuations of my emotions. Moreover, Idra-sama, you should also understand. Idra, I understand, you mean. Tanza, after all, Idra-sama, you and I are both connected to Schwartz-sama. Whatever Schwartz-sama is feeling, it should be transmitted to us in no small amount. Idra, Idra frowned and kept his mouth shut at Tanza's complaint as she kept her back turned. Seeing Idra's expression directly in front of him, Subaru unconsciously gulped. Although the Pleiades battalion was graced by the exceptional strength they received from the effects of Subaru's core Leonis, the members with whom Subaru had a close relationship, Idra and the others who had originated from the same unit, and Tanza, who had a closer relationship with Subaru than the others, received his deficiencies. Subaru felt a sense of relief that Tanza and others did not see that as Subaru's failure or lack of virtue. On the other hand, he felt sorry and that he was still lacking. Indeed, it was at the time Subaru had thought that. Louis, Suddenly, Louis squeezed Subaru's hand back and let out a weak voice. As usual, the details of what she meant, not having formed words, were not known. However, it was clear that she was concerned about Subaru. Even though she was in a situation where she was more injured than he was. Beatrice, if she can talk, there's no need to worry, in fact. If the treatment is over, it would be best to take her outside and have Rem give her a checkup, I suppose. Subaru, I see. Yeah, that's right. With great trouble, we've cleared the way. If we linger here, it's not unlikely that other zombies will gather, making sure not to get those priorities backwards. It happened at that moment. Whoosh, he heard a strange sound, cutting through the wind. Subaru, it sounded like the swinging of a rope with something light strapped to it, but the events that occurred immediately after he heard the sound of cutting wind were not light whatsoever. Tanza, car. A short groan spilled out, and Tanza's body trembled. Then, as she looked down at her shivering body, her round eyes widened. Having pierced through her back and abdomen, something akin to a tentacle with a sharp tip protruded. The tentacle, having pierced Tanza's small body, extended from the direction of the street that had been destroyed in the aftermath of the battle, a long way from where Subaru and the others were. Extended like a writhing serpent, the origin of that tentacle had been. Subaru, huh? A grotesque torso growing from the head that had been kicked away, extending tentacles outwards, was the figure of the zombie from just before. Subaru, A momentary standstill, Subaru's thoughts were dyed white by the figure that trampled upon his imagination and understanding, but in order to avoid that moment from becoming fatal, a voice spoke up. Beatrice, Subaru. Beside him, Beatrice's face had turned pale as she screamed, bringing Subaru's attention back to reality. A sound like blood rushing through his head echoed in Subaru's mind, and he once again took in the scene before him, a one-eyed zombie standing on the destroyed street, its grotesque appearance caught in his gaze. Their head had the same black eye with a golden pupil as before. However, below the neck was not the sturdy body of a warrior, but a monster that could only be described as grotesque, with different thicknesses and lengths of paired left and right arms and legs. From one of its arms, the monster extended a tentacle. No, that was not quite right. It was not a tentacle, but a finger, and it pierced through Tanza's body. Tanza, uck. The moment he saw it, the monster withdrew its long finger that had pierced through Tanza's body, and her body trembled again. Her body, which had been pierced through the torso, spurted blood and she collapsed onto her knees with a powerless thud. Subaru, Tanza. Idra, HK. This is bad. Schwartz. Immediately after Subaru shouted, Subaru, who had reached out and began to run, was forcefully pushed by Idra's palm, which had been thrust out from the side. Subaru's body easily flew through the air from Idra's enhanced push. However, through his inverted vision, he quickly realized that Idra's push was the correct decision. The position where Subaru had been until just before, the monster's shriveled fingers struck. The pavement and buildings along the way were sliced vertically with terrifying sharpness, destroying the city. If it was not for Idra's push, Subaru's body might have been sliced as well. As it was, Subaru's body continued to fly through the air with great momentum. Todd, TCH. Don't tell me it regenerated from its decapitated head. Todd grabbed hold of Subaru with his arm, reaching up from below, stiffening at the sound of Todd's voice coming from overhead. Subaru was shocked by the meaning of his words. To regenerate from a severed head, you gotta be kidding, he muttered. Todd, even though we crushed and crystallized its torso, it's still moving. How is this possible? Subaru, I don't want to admit it, but we have to face the reality that it exists. That eerie appearance of theirs. Beatrice, that's because the formula for regenerating its body is bugged. I suppose. Beatrice was the one who provided an answer to Todd's question, holding Subaru. She was wearing a look of frustration on her cute face, staring at the grotesque monster. Beatrice, perhaps it's the result of rejecting death from damage that should have killed it, I suppose. Todd, In other words, it refuses to die even more than other zombies. No, since they already died, it might be more appropriate to say that they are refusing to go back to death. Subaru, Ugh. Beatrice. Idra. Hurry and save Tanza. Idra, I know, but... In response to Subaru's desperate plea, Idra gritted his teeth and raised his voice. He shared the same concern for the injured Tanza. However, if they acted recklessly, they would draw the attention of the monster. It was already evident that the monster's attacks could reach the Pleiades battalion. If even Idra fell, their chances of winning would vanish. That was Subaru, in the first place. Louis had been injured by the fragments, and Tanza also suffered serious injuries that were clearly life-threatening. The zombie that they thought they had beaten not only was not completely defeated, but they had also transformed into a grotesque creature and stood in their way. This situation seemed as if they had entered a dead-end loop. Subaru, don't be ridiculous. Subaru cut off the foolish thought that had briefly crossed his mind. A dead end of fate, there were loops that could not be resolved no matter what one did. Todd, who carried Subaru, had even brought about such a situation before. However, Subaru was there. Moreover, Subaru had been saved. Even if he had given up on himself, he could not give up on everyone else. Todd, you have a disgusting look in your eyes. Subaru, eh? Todd, that's the look of someone who treats their own life and the lives of others differently. Subaru switched gears with a loud sound in his mind. Todd muttered those words while looking closely at Subaru's expression, but Subaru could not understand what was going through his mind. There was no doubt, however, that disgust must have been seeping through. Todd, let's go. After saying that briefly, Todd kicked the ground strongly while holding Subaru. And then, unbelievably, he turned his back on Tanza, Beatrice, and everyone else and made a beeline for escape. Subaru, what are you doing? If we separate from everyone. Todd, you're the one who needs to look closely. That thing's aim is the two of us, both you and I. As he said that, Todd leaned his body and jumped into a side road. In that moment, Todd's afterimage was grazed by a finger that seemed to pierce through the pavement, and the smell of burning air tickled Subaru's nostrils. For a moment, something flashed before his eyes. It was that monstrous creature, its single eye glowing ominously, chasing after Subaru and the others. Todd, that thing's target seems to be me, who killed it first, and you, who killed it the second time. Subaru, HK. So you lured it away from everyone else? Todd, when others are involved, you don't think straight. Todd looked down at Subaru with his green eyes and said that. Held by him, Subaru was shaken, and as he was stared at by those icy eyes, he felt a fear equal to or greater than the approaching grotesque figure. Even in this situation, Todd's gaze towards Subaru was nothing more than appraisal. Todd, can you think of a way to take it down without your partner? Subaru, if there isn't one. Todd, in that case then, although I hate it, we can do nothing but leave things to chance. Subaru understood that Todd did not really mean what he said. Since they shared the same conditions of being targeted, Todd would use Subaru as a decoy and make a run for it if the situation turned unfavorable for him. He was not doing it right now because the plan of using Subaru as bait to escape had a low chance of success. Conversely, Subaru, if there's a way, you'll lend me a hand, right? Todd, in response to Subaru's question, Todd's expression tightened again. Todd skillfully used the obstacles to hide from the monster's line of sight and evade his attacks. Meanwhile, Subaru, while being carried by him, kept scanning his surroundings looking for a particular building inside the imperial capital. It was the building that Idra had mentioned as they escaped. He had come up with a plan besides the one to hit with Minya, but since he had no way to lure the enemy to the building, he had eliminated it as an option. Todd, can you do it? Subaru, I'll do it. Todd, As soon as Subaru answered the question, Todd raised his eyebrows slightly in surprise, and then sneered with a cruel twist at the corners of his mouth. And then, Todd, all right, I'll follow your plan. As he chased after his fleeing targets, the giant eye Ismail's thoughts had shattered to thousands of pieces. Ismail, with flickering vision and scattered thoughts, his boorish movements were far from refined. With limbs of varying lengths scraping against the ground, with instability akin to a newborn beast, as he was crashing into walls and against the ground, he stretched his hands, his fingers, out towards those backs that were growing distant. The reason for his obsession over those two fleeing enemies was something Ismail could no longer recall. Already, with the fact that it had once been Ismail fading into oblivion, the grotesque monster grew new limbs from the cracks that it sustained every time it fell, continuously furthering its repulsiveness. That was undoubtedly the obstreperous behavior of the regeneration ability that Beatrice had pointed out. However, after being resurrected by the will of another, those mutations occurring in Ismail's body, which had been exceptionally estranged from the concept of death, was something that not even the caster would be able to control. Achieving its goal, slaughtering the two targets of its obsession, what would become of the monster thereafter? Eerily letting out hollow roars, that was something of no interest whatsoever to this monster. Ismail, the larger of his two targets was carrying the smaller one as they fled, and as soon as it seemed like he could seize their backs, they would pull away, and so the situation that forced him to repeat his unsuccessful strikes continued. However, his opponents could not keep fleeing forever. Through continuing his unshapely sprint, limbs had grown all over his fallen body, to the point that Ismail could no longer fall. And since he would not fall, it stood to reason that the one with more limbs would run faster. Therefore, to his targets trying to escape, little by little, Ismail shortened the distance, shortening it and shortening it and shortening it. With a short roar, Ismail's finger gouged his fleeing target's back and shoulders, blood spurted, and a heinous smile appeared on Ismail's face as he heard the screams of his enemy. It felt good. With incredible enjoyment, more and more blood, more and more screams, he wanted to hear. Recklessly taking a turn onto another path, his opponents, unlike how they had been up to this point, gave off a sense of desperation. Chased by Ismail, being caught up to by the monster, hating the idea of being torn to shreds, his targets desperately fled. Aiming for their limbs, especially those on their upper bodies, he would wound them. If he aimed for their legs, his targets would no longer be able to escape. If that happened, then this would come to an end. If it ended, he would be lonely. If it ended, he would be disappointed. That was why, forever and ever, in order for it not to end. Raising a low war cry that caused the air to tremble, Ismail smashed into buildings and trampled the streets, kicking off the flooded ground in pursuit of his targets. He closed the distance in an instant. Perhaps the stamina of his fleeing enemy had finally been exhausted, and shedding blood, they clicked their tongue as they leapt into a nearby building. With nowhere to run, they made the foolish choice to dive into a dead end. Sensing the end of this hunting period, Ismail, the monster that had ceased to be Ismail, tore down the closed door and slipped inside. His limbs had multiplied, his body had swelled, and with a frame incomparably larger than his original body, he became unable to easily open the door and enter the building. Then, entering the dim building into which his targets had fled, the monster looked around inside. The sources of light were meager, but even if he had transformed into such a grotesque state, his special eye alone remained unchanged. With a blink, he switched the way he saw the world, and searched for the figures of his hidden prey. As he searched, the monster realized. Ismail, In the building it had entered, there was so much flour fluttering around that it was enough to stain the monster's entire body white. The darkness was not the only reason for his hazy vision, but also because the air inside of the building was filled with scattered flour. Looking around, he saw that the building was lined with shelves, and that each shelf had been lined with sacks filled to the extent of bursting. Those sacks had been torn open, and a large quantity of flour had been scattered throughout the building. The thing that beats you isn't gonna be magic or a killer technique. At the same time the flour-covered monster had noticed the situation inside of the building, he heard that voice from behind. The monster turned around, and in his field of view, there was a small, bright red silhouette. It was one of the fleeing targets. No, at some point, the fleeing target had become just one person. Separated from the larger one, the smaller one that he had lost sight of now stood there. And then? Eat this, the soul of science, dust explosion. Right after that shout, the small figures' surroundings were also all dyed red in one fell swoop. A tremendous explosion blew away the flour mill, and the monster was engulfed by a bright crimson lotus. Idra, Schwartz, look, let's use that flour mill as a landmark. It's the building with the water wheel beside it. Idra, taking the non-combatants with him and staying vigilant of his surroundings while spurring on the gale-wind horse, was the son of a miller before he had been sent to the Gladiator Island. Subaru had not known exactly what role a miller played, but he had been told that they used the power of a water wheel to grind wheat into flour. In other words, Subaru, if we use the ingredients in that mill, we can make a dust explosion. A dust explosion was a phenomenon in which flammable powdery materials were scattered in the air, and when kindled, fire would spread in a chain reaction, igniting and exploding all at once. In addition to the enclosed space of the flour mill, with a large amount of wheat flour fluttering about, if an incendiary material was dropped in with definite vigor. Subaru, I had no idea it would end up being this powerful. Leaning his back against the battered wall, Subaru muttered while coughing. In front of Subaru's eyes was the flour mill that had been blown to grains by the dust explosion that was triggered, and the charred remains of the monster that had been engulfed in it. When he and Todd needed to bait and defeat the monster together, the plan that came to Subaru's mind was to make a dust explosion using the flour mill. Of course, a dust explosion was not something that was easy to pull off, and he had no confidence that he would be able to successfully lead his opponent there in the first place. Therefore, it was not just Subaru's strength that made the plan so successful. Subaru, are you alive, Todd? Blown away by the impact of the explosion, Subaru stood up, blinking his eyes while shaking his head. After the division of roles, Todd took on the duty of drawing the monster's attention and running away until the flour mill was ready while Subaru snuck into the mill and spread the dust aptly through the building. Then, when Todd saw that the time was right, he burst into the mill and threw an incendiary at the place where he guided the monster. It was also Todd who prepared that incendiary. Subaru, Todd, you don't have to call out to me so pathetically. I'm still alive. Subaru, HK. Subaru, who had been calling out to the area around the epicenter of the explosion, evidenced by the many embers that remained, heard a slightly hoarse voice and turned to face in that direction. Looking over, he spotted where the wall of the mill had blown down onto the destroyed street, and he saw Todd on one knee. When he saw Subaru walking towards him, he spat out the saliva in his mouth and said, "Todd, you nearly got me killed there, man. Subaru, you're making me look like the bad guy. After all, I told you it would be very powerful, yeah? Todd, occasionally, an accident like this happens, but when I heard the principle behind it, it made sense." As expected, Todd was breathing with difficulty as he fell back onto the street. Then, as he looked toward the blown-up mill. Todd, what happened to our opponent? Subaru, he was blown away, completely. Look. With that, Subaru pointed to a part of the blown-up monster that was just visible from their position. Then, a part that was seared by the embers crumbled like sand and lost its shape. Like the dispersal of the other zombies, it was the result of completely crushing its regenerative abilities. Subaru, how are your injuries? This time, confirming that they had defeated the formidable zombie, Subaru asked Todd a question. When they were dividing their jobs, since they could not afford to be caught by the enemy, Todd, who could keep running away for a while, had no choice but to play the role of decoy. However, he had volunteered for the role himself. It had defied Subaru's expectations that Todd would absolutely avoid any plan that would endanger his own life. Todd, it wouldn't be a good story if I easily lost my life while being unwilling to suffer fresh wounds. We both just did our required roles. Although. Subaru, Todd, I was gouged out pretty much everywhere. I feel like I'm missing a lot of blood. As he said this, Todd raised a hand, and it was clear that his injury was quite severe. Although he had no wounds that could be called deep, his shoulders and thighs were soaked with blood, and his face was pale from the amount of blood that he had lost. If left unchecked, it would undoubtedly endanger his life. Subaru, I'll immediately go and call Beatrice. Subaru tried to move with such intentions. With Subaru and Todd's separation, Beatrice would have surely been left in a panic. But, he was sure that she would prioritize Tanza's treatment. Louis and Tanza's safety was also a concern, so they needed to hurry to meet up with Beatrice and the others. And then. Todd, after all, if we've done this much, Katya won't be able to complain. Subaru, huh? Todd, we talked about this at the mansion, didn't we? Because she seems to think I'm lazy. I helped us escape, defeated a really strong enemy, and even suffered honorable injuries. Don't tell me you're also going to take all the credit for yourself, huh? Todd said that with a shrug of his shoulders and a pale face that was drained of blood. For a moment, Subaru was taken aback before letting out a ha and exhaling a weak breath. Despite being in such a battered state, the one that still weighed on his mind was Katya. Perhaps he had also planned to untie Subaru's mental tension, but either way. Subaru, Katya-san truly is important to you, huh? Todd, that's a given. She's my fiancée. Katya is my very life. Todd declared this without any shame. Upon hearing that response, Subaru took a deep breath, held it momentarily, and then by saying all right, he fired himself up. Even now, he was afraid of Todd. The things that man had done had left deep scars on his heart. Still, the fact remained that they had cooperated to defeat that monster here. Even to the extent of getting completely battered, Todd had devoted himself to ensuring everyone, including Subaru and his friends, could get out of this alive. If that was the case, then now it was Subaru's turn. Subaru, wait here. No, someone who heard the explosion might come here. For now, just return with me along the way. Once we find a suitable place, wait for me there. Todd, I understand. I'm counting on you, so please don't leave me behind. Subaru, I wouldn't do that. Todd made Subaru think that it may have been possible to finish things without doing that. However, even if Subaru had been in an hostile position towards Todd, he was unsure of whether he could have left him there on the verge of death. Subaru, no, if I overthink it, I'll get stuck in a rut. Anyway. Even if he were to lend a shoulder to Todd, their height difference would make it difficult. Subaru looked around the blown-off mill, hoping to find something he could use as a makeshift cane. Then, he found a support pole for a shelf that had been blown into the midst of the embers. Subaru, .. At that moment, a hard sound rang out. Subaru, why? The moment the hard sound resounded, Subaru cast his eyes down and tightly clenched his fist. As his lips trembled, shoulders trembled in fear, and black eyes trembled, he muttered. Subaru, why? Todd, His question receiving no response, Subaru turned around as he exhaled. Having turned around, before Subaru's eyes was the blade of an axe that had been swung down, stopped just a hair's breadth away from crushing his skull. For it was restrained by that which was visible to none but Subaru, the unseen hand. Todd, my bad. With a small click of his tongue, Todd released the axe from his hand and jumped backwards. His swift movements showing no signs of blood loss or injury, Subaru grit his teeth. Even that had been an act. The pain from his injuries, the plea for help from Subaru, speaking of his feelings for Katya, which had softened Subaru's heart, all of it was just an act. Subaru, why? 3 times, Subaru had fired off the same question, glaring at Todd with a face that looked like it was about to cry. While glaring at him, he felt tears welling up from the overwhelming frustration. Subaru, up until now, you haven't done anything. You haven't killed anyone. I could have even forgiven you. Todd, quietly, you slowly damaged my trust in you. Listening to Subaru's screams, drawing a knife in place of the axe he had released, Todd readied himself. That had been the declaration of the irreparable separation between Natsuki Subaru and Todd Fang.